Hi, welcome everyone to another episode of Cinematic Realms. I'm your host Gwen. Although I have to admit, I am feeling a little John today because I've been allowing myself to get a little scruffy, and I'm decked out in my full Lord of the Rings regalia. So I'm feeling a little different today, but that's okay. I've said before that I'm kind of feeling both. So I wanted to share everybody, though, I am wearing a War of the Rohirrim shirt,
Nice.
which I got over the holidays while I was in Maryland. So yeah. Yeah, I hope you guys are all doing well today. Yeah, we're going to be talking. This is our first last week we came back for the new year, but it was a Knights of Kira stream, so I think this is like our official quote-unquote cinematic realms start to the year. And what else? We're diving into Christopher Nolan, and we're going to be celebrating a slightly late 10th year anniversary of Interstellar, but it's still within the 10 years because we haven't come around to the 11th year yet, so I think it still works. But yeah, just wanted to say hi to everyone real quick. Hello, Stephanie. Hello, Mother Ryan. Great to see you guys. Yeah. So yeah, how are you doing, Jared?
I'm doing well. You'll notice the different environs again. I'm once again at my parents' house, dog sitting, and he's being a good boy right now. But if he does start to act up and I have to disappear for a few seconds, you will know why. And yeah, I'm. You may have noticed I did shave this morning, although I don't go clean shaven. I haven't been clean shaven in several years, so it was just a little trim. But I felt like I needed to spruce myself up because my beard was getting a little bit shaggy.
Oh, great, thanks. Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm feeling barbarian-ish. Yeah, I know that's an exaggeration. It's not that much, but famously, a lot of people loved it when I had the beard, but it's never felt me. So this is purely a sign of laziness this weekend. But I'm kind of feeling it feels weird because I've made a statement that like the beard is not me. It doesn't feel right to me. So yeah. So I'm feeling a little out of sorts today, but that's okay. It matches with the art that Sanri did for me, which I actually don't have up right now. If you look at the art for the channel, it's me clean shaven, but but the art I had up for a long time was me with a beard. So it is what it is. But so I decided, like, since I had the beard, I'd go right full into the classic image, me with the Lord of the Rings hat and everything. So but yeah, is the dog?
Oh no, I know that the light is kind of coming through at an interesting angle. I was trying to get rid of it.
Oh yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, before we start in with the discussion, I just had a couple things like I have to touch on with you, Jared. First of all, you did get to see Nosferatu.
I did. Just last night.
Yeah, and by your reaction, you loved it.
I did. Robert Eggers is one of my favorite living filmmakers, and he proved why yet again with Nosferatu. It's another dark masterpiece, and I had posted in my kind of initial reaction that it's basically another one of these chilling, psychologically twisted, beautifully crafted, entrancing nightmares that he seems to specialize in, or as I unofficially like to say, his dark mindfuck trilogy has become a dark mindfuck quadrilogy, and may it continue to grow. Because yes, I love the movie. It's either my first or second favorite movie of 2024. Again, I did not see as many movies in 2024 as I normally did, but this and Doom Part 2 make it
well, and that leads into my second little discussion point before we go into our main topic today, which is that after many fits and starts over the past year, I have finally finished Children of Dune.
Nice.
And the fits and starts are not because I wasn't enjoying it. I actually enjoyed it immensely. It's just because I haven't been in the reading zone this year. And like when I am, I'm reading, but then if I get interrupted from that sort of flow of, that natural flow, then it can be a long time before I get back to it. So I almost kind of want to put it on the pile of things that I want to reread and in one stretch, because it's a very like detailed and complicated book. And for the most part, I loved it. Things really did get weird at the end of the book. and I can see how from this point on it's a thing.
You may want to take a little break before you delve into God Emperor, because that's
well, I had made a decision before I had even started the book that I was going to probably stop, or at least pause, after Children of Dune and go on to some other things, because there's a lot of stuff I want to read and I don't want to stay stuck in the Dune universe for the next couple of years while I slowly work my way through. And I think that's actually a really good decision, because this feels like the end of like a significant chapter of the story, the story of Paul Atreides and the surrounding characters. And it feels like the next book, based on the blurb that I read from God Emperor, it takes a major leap forward in time. And so it feels like a natural breaking point, and yeah, I will say, and I promise everybody we're getting Interstellar, but like these are things that Jared and I have to talk about real quick, because I haven't had a chance to touch base with you. I will say, on the one hand, I get why Denis doesn't necessarily want to go past Dune Messiah for his adaptation, but on the other hand, like Warner Brothers is going to make Children of Dune, right? I mean, they're going to. I feel like I would really love to see what Denis would do with this. And some of the things that I perhaps didn't take to as much, I feel like he would make it a bit more grounded in some areas. And I'd be interested to see how he would sort of resolve that story. Because even though he said that he wants to finish with Dune Messiah to tell the story of Paul Atreides, I kind of feel like Children of Dune is really where that story reaches its conclusion. And so I don't know. I'd rather, like, if they're going to do it, I'd rather he did it. But at the same time, like, if he doesn't want to, he doesn't want to. He's going to tell the story that he wants to, and to be fair, like, we haven't seen his Dune Messiah yet, so it may end in a way that makes it feel like, oh yeah, that's the natural ending point.
Yeah, and I mean, I that's the way I feel. Like, I want to see Dune Messiah before I make any determinations as to whether it should go on and whether he should go on with it. And I suspect he probably won't, because I've been of the opinion that they may pull some elements from Children of Dune forward into Dune Messiah, just based on some decisions they've already made. But we'll see.
I don't like. I guarantee people are like, hey, we came here for Interstellar discussion. We're getting there in just a minute, folks. I will say, like, I don't really want them to pull too much with Aaliyah's story from Children of Dune into Dune Messiah, because, like, I kind of want her to just be okay for one whole movie, and because she does have things in Dune Messiah that are, like, that are separate from the things that she goes through later. And so I don't know. I'd rather they held off on that, but we shall find out. Anyway, so yeah. So I just wanted to touch base on that, because That's big. And now I get to decide what my next book is going to be. So we'll see. Let's move on to our main topic of discussion. And maybe we've already lost some people, but but we're talking about it's the 10th anniversary of Interstellar. I got a chance to do my rewatch this morning. Glad I had enough time because I forgot it's a nearly 3-hour movie. But yeah, like we'll get into sort of the initial reaction to the movie from both fans and critical circles and stuff like that, because it's a discussion point that I do want to get into. But I will just say, for me, from the time that I saw this movie initially in theaters, I was just absolutely in love with it, because it's, for one thing, I think it's, for me, it's Christopher Nolan's most emotional film. And also it was something that I'd kind of been itching for, which is not necessarily in tone, because you couldn't get any more different tonally, but like sort of a 2001-esque in scale science fiction epic. And I don't think there was anybody better to do that than Christopher Nolan in modern cinema. But it does things that, for me, that like, I mean, I greatly admire 2001, and I'm not here to compare like Kubrick, Nolan, and all that. But one of the things that, like, I don't go to 2001, for the emotion, when I'm watching. Maybe a certain kind of emotion, but not like tug on the heartstrings. That type of thing, and that is something that Interstellar gives me in spades, and I love that juxtaposition of like this grand epic sci-fi, epic is just the word that comes to mind, but then distilling it down to the story of the relationship between a father and his daughter. And so it's that the juxtaposition of the epic and scale, but the intimate in emotions. And so, yeah, and so many of the techniques here, are reminiscent of what they were doing in 2001, and, and all that stuff. And you can always depend on Christopher Nolan to really, bring it with visual effects and, just visuals in general, in a way that other modern filmmakers, except perhaps Denis Villeneuve, they're just not doing, because it's not expedient for them, or everybody else is doing it the other way, where, we're really just relying on CG, and if it doesn't look completely real, who cares? It's the story we're focused on. But he's making sure that both the story is amazing, and also the visuals are as realistic and compelling as he can possibly make them. There are things in the movie that, like, I'm like, could that actually happen in reality? I don't quite care, because I believe that it's happening in front of me, just because of how well crafted everything is. And so the only way to describe my reaction to this film upon seeing it initially was just awe. I was awestruck by it. So yeah, I'll hand it over to you, sir.
Yeah, no, this is a beautiful masterpiece of a movie. And I think that I always appreciated that on more of an intellectual level than an emotional level from the start. But it is only, those two have only blended together in greater harmony in the years since. I think, thinking back to when I first saw this movie, this movie came out in 2014, hence why we're celebrating just after the 10th anniversary right now. And it came at an interesting point in Nolan's filmography, because on the one hand, he had already proven himself to be one of the most bankable and successful and brilliant directors and working in Hollywood, because he had completed his Dark Knight trilogy at this point, and more importantly, perhaps directly foretelling this movie, he had a massive original science fiction epic success already by making Inception in 2010. And this, so basically, he had the opportunity to write his own check at this point. And one of the things that I've consistently loved about Christopher Nolan and continue to love about his work, even going on to his next project, is he recognizes that because he has been, because of the talent that he possesses and also the success that he's been fortunate enough to have, he can make movies and get movies made that perhaps no other director could. And I don't just mean that in terms of the scale of the artistic, vision and the craftsmanship. I mean, the idea that, the studio system would greenlight a completely original sci-fi epic, that is very heavy on, like scientific, concepts, but there are no aliens. There are no, like more conveniently marketable things to make it more recognizably science fiction. Nolan is perhaps the only director who could have made this movie. And for that reason, it feels arguably like one of his most personal films. And I think that is one of the reasons why people were a little, taken aback by it on its first release, or at least some people, because, it's easy to put directors into boxes, and Nolan had kind of made himself a name as like the technically expert craftsman of like major comic book movies and science fiction movies. But he had also developed a reputation for what I believe is unfair, but had stuck to him, of being a cold filmmaker, in the sense that his movies were not the most, did not have that sweeping emotional heart. They were much, they often dealt with darker subject matter. The characters were oftentimes, much more morally conflicted. And so I think that's what people might have been expecting from a movie like Interstellar. And it is not that. It is a kind of unique one of one in the way it blends, this epic science fiction, galaxy spanning story with the most like personal and intimate relationship between a parent and a child that you can see on screen. And it's that I think that people were not ready for it. I was not ready for it in that sense, because again, I had never seen something like this from Nolan before. But I knew that what he had done was something that needed to be, revisited and studied. And over the years, I have come back to this movie, and I've just loved it even more with each viewing. And we'll talk about some of the other, things that make it special, like including the fact that, this also stars Matthew McConaughey in, coming off his Oscar win and just an all-time, leading man science fiction performance here. But it is ultimately a movie that I think feels like it only could have been made at that time, but now that it is here, it feels timeless in many ways. And for a movie that is in many ways about time, I think that's very, very apt.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think it's only feels even more relevant today than perhaps when it was released. And some things made me worried about the path that we're currently on.
We'll talk about what is perhaps the most realistic version of an apocalypse that we will ever see on screen. This is how it is actually going to end.
Yeah, I will say on the subject of Matthew McConaughey, it's really funny because I had been a fan of his from, going back. I'm trying to think of the first thing I saw him in was probably, for me, one of the first. It was around the time when he was doing things like Amistad and Contact. Contact was the major thing that I remember, like, first noticing him. And I know he had done stuff before that, but I was young at the time, so that was the first time I really noticed. But when he was like, when the whole thing was going on with his Oscar, I remember getting so fed up with every one of his acceptance speeches because he kept doing that stupid all right thing, and I was like, just shut the and I was like, I know I've liked this guy in some movies, but I'm getting irritated by him. But then the very next year, this film comes out and he blows me away with his performance, and I'm like, okay, McConaughey, you're back in my good graces. And it's just sometimes that whole Oscar thing just becomes a whole different, animal. And I don't know why sometimes certain things hit you. Like speaking of like Oscar campaigning, a lot of people had been like really kind of getting on Anne Hathaway's case for when she won her Oscar in 2012, which for me was driven more by sexism, honestly, than perhaps a refrain in every one of her speeches, as it was for me and McConaughey. But it's funny that never really like nothing about her, winning or her campaign got under my skin in that way. So I don't know. It's just this weird thing with awards. It's probably why over time I've just kind of started to move away from them. But it's funny. Like you and I will jump back and forth. We were so into the Oscar race last year, and then this year we're like, we don't give a shit. But anyway, so point being, I saw him in this, and it reminded me of why I loved him so much as an actor, and I think it's got to be one of my favorite performances of his ever. The scene where he's watching the video messages, from his children, and as they change over time, and especially when he gets the very first one from Murph as a grown adult, just like slays me like every single time. And not to get ahead of ourselves, and we'll talk about when we get there, but that scene between him and a much older Murph at the end of the movie, just like I was just a mess watching that today. So I just think it's a beautiful performance. Like he gets the chance to do all of his humorous, McConaugheyisms, but also there's just this heart that he carries throughout the film, and like I said before, it's the relationship between him and his daughter, but also just with the rest of his cast members, and it's a beautiful performance, and I think he's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, to take you back into the days of pop culture from the early 2010s, this movie comes at perhaps what some would consider the end of the period of time that was known as the McConaissance. To bring a word back you may not have heard in a while. And the fairly or unfairly, the reason that came into being is because after having started his career with movies like Contact, which I think we'll actually be touching on again because it does share some important strands of DNA with this movie, in addition to having a great Matthew McConaughey performance. But then he kind of got, being a very handsome guy, had kind of gotten drawn into the Hollywood orbit of a bunch of different like rom-coms and movies that people thought were not perhaps his the most challenging for him as a performer. But then he started to take on projects that were a bit more smaller, more independent, interesting, and he was in, like, I love the movie Mud, and then he was in the Dallas Buyers Club, Wolf of Wall Street.
Which, by the way, I should take a moment to say, even though I got, as I admittedly said that I was irritated by the whole Oscar campaign. He's fantastic in the film he won for, which was Dallas Buyers Club. Like it's an astonishing performance. So I'm not getting down on the performance. It was just one of those things where I was like, my fuse was, running short on that year.
Yeah. No, I mean he is great in that movie. I think he's better in this. I think that this is it is his best work. But also, and part of that time period, the other big thing that had kind of launched him into the stratosphere was he was also in the first season of the HBO show True Detective. And was excellent in that. But I think perhaps the reason I wasn't as exasperated with the all right in the speeches was because I was more exasperated with the online audience who couldn't stop making time is a flat circle jokes. This is so it was an interesting time in that. But ultimately, the reason I bring that up is because this kind of is, after this, I think he takes a little bit of a break, although he has some interesting work that comes out after this. But in many ways, while he won his Oscar the year before for Dallas Buyers Club, I really consider this to be like the apotheosis of his career so far. And the fact that it came at the tail end of this time period kind of meant that, I think it got a lot of appreciation then, but over the years, I've just seen the love for this performance and this movie only redouble. Like you mentioned, the clip of him, crying, watching the messages from his children after the time slippage, and anecdotal evidence, but like many times when you see those posts online and people like post a clip of some of the greatest acting you've ever seen, if you go down to the comments, at least 20 people are posting that clip, and for good reason, because what he does in that scene is extraordinary. And for an actor who some people thought wasn't showing much range, he destroyed that forever with that scene. But overall, it's just kind of he is the heart of the movie, along with Murph, his daughter, and the only reason it's not like considered a towering two-hander, I would say, is because Murph is, given the nature of the story, is ultimately played by 3 different actresses over time. Yeah. But his relationship with all 3 of them makes you realize that the love that he has for this woman, his daughter, is as we learn later in the movie, the one thing that could have transcended the dimensions between time and space. And I think that gives it a beautiful, like, a heart of for the movie that allows it to carry through, even when the science, which is, I think, very accurate for the time, but it is in one of those, to borrow a line from a later movie of his that kind of deals with similar things in Tenet. Sometimes you don't have to understand it; you just have to feel it. And I think that with this movie, you absolutely do, because of Matthew McConaughey's performance and Christopher Nolan's direction, among many other virtues.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and applaud all 3 actresses who get to play Murph. First, we have Mackenzie Foy as the 10-year-old Murph, who, for me, as much as I love Jessica Chastain, I think that Mackenzie Foy is kind of the star here for the character of Murph. And I will say, to make a link to our favorite actress, she was also later in the Disney movie The Nutcracker in the Four Realms, which was not very well received, but through no fault of hers. And I think that she was great in that. And of course, I always have to mention that I think it's one of my favorite Kira performances as the Sugar Plum Fairy, because she gets to play sort of diabolical evil in that movie, and it is so much fun to watch her do that. So I think it's not like a misunderstood classic or anything, but I don't know if the movie was given a but no, she was great in that, but like in this, just that scene where Cooper is leaving, and just he says, "I'm coming back, Murph," and her, when it's just like so heartbreaking. And yeah, she's phenomenal. And then I mentioned Jessica Chastain, who plays the adult Murph. It's like, it's so wonderful when Cooper is watching those messages from home, and then just all of a sudden it cuts to Jessica Chastain, and that's the first time you see her in the movie, and it's so effective to cut to the adult Murph for the first time through that video footage. And and her first words are, "Hi, Dad, you son of a bitch." It's, oh God, it's so good. And then of course Ellen Burstyn plays the much older Murph, once Cooper comes back at the end of the film. And it's such a small role, because she only has like no more than a minute of screen time, I would think. But she's so good that, like, the fact that I'm immediately like awash in tears watching that scene between the two of them, like, really goes to show how great she was at conveying that character, and making us believe that is in fact Murph. And so yeah, I think it's three beautiful performances for one amazing character. And yeah, it's like, that's not an easy thing to do. I think we get something similar in Atonement with the character of Bryony. And it's, that's a tough call to bring in three different actors to play the same role.
Yeah, no, it is a very difficult thing for the movie to pull off structurally, but they do it because all three actresses know the assignment and know the heart of the character, and convey that in very different ways. Mackenzie Foy with the kind of the raw pain that she's feeling at her father, choosing to leave her. Jessica Chastain in many ways with the anger and determination that ultimately leads to catharsis when she realizes, what her father was actually, doing for her and did for her. And then Ellen Burstyn, both at the end, and actually I think she's in the very beginning as well.
Yes.
Which we don't realize at the time that, like, that's who it's Murph, but she gets to play the kind of the at the very end of her life, the character who gives the understanding, and if not absolution, but definitely the sense of closure that Cooper that desperately needed from her. And it's all three of them will make you cry. This movie does not run. This movie runs up a pretty high counter on the tier scale. For many people, that's one of the reasons why so many people love it, is because it is so deeply emotional, and you in the audience will a lot of times find yourself crying along with the characters, but it's always because they feel real to you in that moment, even when they're millions of light years apart.
Yeah, I will say, it just as a funny anecdote, I'm really glad that, like, when I know she has a vast filmography with things that I probably have needed to see for years and still haven't, but the thing that I had known Ellen Burstyn for before this was Requiem for a Dream, and I'm kind of glad to have this supplanted as like my go-to image of of her instead of that, and that's a movie I never should have seen, because I saw it because somebody from work really was going on and on about, and they wanted me to watch it. And then I'm like, okay, extremely well made, phenomenal film with performances and all that. I do not ever want to see that again because it scared the shit out of me. And yeah.
Well, speaking of movies that scare the shit out of you, starring Ellen Burstyn, obviously one of her most famous roles is as the lead in The Exorcist. But obviously
which I've never seen,
Yeah.
because the thing is, and it's funny because we started off the stream talking about Nosferatu, but I'm famously not a horror movie person unless there's a very particular angle to it that I appreciate, and most horror movies do not cross that threshold for me to get me to want to see them. But the exceptions being if there's a science fiction element to it, or apparently if it's directed by Robert Eggers. But also in the case of something like Nosferatu, that's also got the sort of historical period drama angle as well. But yeah, so but I'm just glad I don't have to think about Requiem for a Dream anymore when I think about her. So yeah, and you mentioned the footage in the beginning of the movie, the sort of documentary footage, which I've always thought was a brilliant way to start off this movie, and it's a very unique, and I don't think any of his other films have something like that, where it starts off like from a future date that's recalling these events as though we were watching a documentary on the Dust Bowl, which is mentioned, in the film, and it just adds this sense of realism to everything that we're watching. We're obviously watching something that's far in the future, but it's being told from the vantage point of a further future. Yeah, and yeah, so it just makes everything feel real because it's looking back on a time past that we've yet to experience. And we're told that this is not even the time of the story in which it takes place is not even the worst that it's been for a couple generations. John Lithgow remembers things from a time that is, similar to what we know of as modern day life. But for Cooper, he's talking about, well, in my day, people were too busy fighting over food to worry about a baseball game. But no, I feel like John Lithgow is speaking for us, the audience, when he's like, popcorn at a ball game is unnatural. I want a hot dog. Yeah. Speaking of which, John Lithgow, he doesn't have the biggest role in this film, but like Christopher Nolan always knows what he's doing with casting, because we immediately really love John Lithgow, even though there are times when he can play a real son of a bitch. He's always a very calming presence when he needs to be in a movie, and so we immediately like, oh, John Lithgow's the grandfather. Okay, cool. I feel safe with him.
I mean, he has a lot of great moments, both emotional and funny in his small role in this film. But I in particular, yes, the scene about the baseball game when he basically, like, back in my day we had real ball players, who are these bums, and then it cuts to the banner says, "Welcome to world famous New York Yankees." Just and you're just like. But it's actually, in addition to being a funny moment, is one of the things that kind of helps set the stage and ground the movie in its early setting, because it kind of is starts at an interesting place, in the sense that we're used to seeing movies about the end of the world, the apocalypse, as it's starting, and the kind of the chaos that characters are uh, are dealing with, or like when they're right in the middle of it and they're kind of having to fight for the horrors of survival. And this movie kind of comes in many ways at the end. Like in many ways, the apocalypse has already happened, and it's just all that's waiting for is kind of the long, slow, death of not only the planet and humanity, but just of everything that once made us, special. And when I think about this movie, one of the things that always comes to mind first is the teaser trailer, which came out a year before the film was started, and it's actually one of my favorite teaser trailers ever, because there's not a ton of footage from the movie. There's actually just a few shots and then a lot of archival footage, but it is essentially Matthew McConaughey. Just speaking, and most of the speech is not actually in the movie itself, but it's really the thematic statement for the entire film. And I'll just read it here. He says, quote, "We've always defined ourselves by the ability to overcome the impossible. And we count these moments where we dare to aim higher, to break barriers, to reach for the stars, to make the unknown known. We count these moments as our proudest achievements. But we lost all that. Or perhaps we've just forgotten that we are still pioneers and we've barely begun, that our greatest accomplishments cannot be behind us, that our destiny lies above us." And in that teaser trailer, those final lines are paired with the shot of the ship, the spaceship launching. And I just remember getting chills watching that in the theater, because, it told you everything you needed to know about the story without giving anything away. But the reason I bring it up now is because that idea of like, we used to be able to overcome the impossible, and we were always striving to reach for the stars, to make the unknown known, but we lost all that. This is the movie. That's where the movie starts. The movie starts with the loss of being palpable, not only of the fact that the world is dying and people are running out of food, but effectively the loss of hope, because in many respects this is a world that is given up. Even if they're not, like, one of the other big key refrains throughout the movie is Michael Caine's character, Professor John Brand, reciting the Dylan Thomas poem, "Do not go gentle into that good night, rage, rage against the dying of the light." This is a world that in many respects is not doing that at the beginning of the movie. They seem to have abandoned much of what seemed like could help them, because they wanted to avoid the wastes and excesses of the 21st century, as one character said. And I think that is, and that scene in particular, the parent teacher conference, I get that. That's actually one of the moments where I really clicked in, where the lovely single Mrs. Hanley, who perhaps was hoping to have a little bit more of a connection with Cooper.
Yeah, I wonder why she's single.
Yeah, we don't know. But exactly, when she brings up the line that like when she brings up the line about the moon landing, and so she's like, we've replaced it with the corrected versions, and you just Matthew McConaughey do the double take, like, "Excuse me," and she's like, "It was a propaganda to bankrupt the Russians," and and you can just see Matthew McConaughey, as Cooper, like, in shock, and you don't believe we went to the moon. And then he just starts, quietly seething, which is actually a brilliant little piece of writing in there, when he talks about the fact that, one of those useless machines that they used to make was called an MRI. And if we still had any of those, they might have found the cyst in my wife's brain before it killed her. And then she would be the one listening to this instead of me, which would be a good thing, because she was always the calmer one. And you can just and that again is I think was one of his best moments in the movie, punctuated by the funny payoff when he goes back out to the car and to Murph, and he's like, "Yeah, I got you suspended." but
I will say, it's.
Go ahead. I'm just saying
that is one of those things that really changes with time, because of course this movie came out during the Obama administration.
Yes.
Oh God, remember that? Yeah. And so listening to that was elicited more of a chuckle, than anything. And now it's like, oh fuck.
Yeah, no, that's where I was
Um,
going with this. Then that's where I was like,
yeah,
watching this now, I was like, oh shit, this movie predicted the future, didn't they? And not in the
yeah,
way you would have wanted. Um,
yeah,
it's a post-truth society in addition to being a post-hope society, and that's one of the reasons why you realize that the species in many respects has failed, and it takes an act of extraordinary faith and courage to break through that. And that is ultimately, the story of the mission that Matthew McConaughey's character goes on, in which his daughter Murph helped him complete. But when we start there, like it's honestly one of the bleakest openings to any movie that you've seen, even though it doesn't look like a traditional apocalypse. There's still bright skies and green cornfields, and it doesn't
well, and
look.
in fact, a lot like the thing that keeps being said throughout the beginning of the movie is things are getting better. It's, it's, and part of that is, the government's not letting on necessarily about exactly how bad things are, but also, it's what we've been seeing with, where, half of this country has been ringing the alarm bells on global warming, but then the other half is like, no, it's just natural, nothing we can do about it. Things will be fine, and that's what we see in this movie. Of like things have always gotten better, and and we're headed towards better. When in reality, that's not the case. And I will say, I felt really happy about the fact that I think when I saw the movie originally, like, I don't know that I had a feeling about it, but now watching it this time, when Professor Brandt says, that's why they brought us, NASA, back in secret. They couldn't very well tell, people that they're, spending all this money on space exploration when they're fighting to put food on the table. And I'm like, no, yeah, that's the right thing to do, because people are stupid. And like, sorry, but that's that's the truth. And yeah, it's just this notion of and we'll talk about Dr. Mann when we get to that part of the film, but one thing that he actually does nail is that when he talked about people, and we have not evolved to that place as a species where people can actually care about the species, that we're very empathetic towards people that we know, but that compassion does not extend beyond our own line of sight. And obviously Dr. Mann has some issues that we'll get into, but I think he nailed humanity right there, and we see it every day in our world. So
Yeah, no, and even like what's going on here in just what's going on in Los Angeles right now with the fires, and the fact that obviously global warming is a factor, but some people aren't willing to see that, and there's obviously great compassion being shown to many people, but there's also a lot of heartless cruelty that is unfolding as with this great tragedy. And for some people, in many respects, it's the idea that some people don't care about things because they're too abstract, or because it's just too big of a problem to wrap their mind around, and that's understandable. Wanting to protect what's right and nearby and close to you and matters most to you. But this is the tragedy of the commons, kind of, or fallacy. The idea that if everybody does this, then we truly are fucked as a species, because you need to have some people who see the bigger picture, who make the selfless sacrifice, and who try to strive and reach the greater good, to draw back to that speech I referenced, to break barriers, reach for the stars, to make the unknown known. And see, it's it's frustrating to see this play out in the movie because it's so relatable. in the early part, but also that means that it is the perfect setup for the reveal of what needs to happen in order for the humanity to go on, and the sacrifices that Cooper and his family will have to make to achieve it. But then also, the challenges that continue to unfold, both with the fact that even though Dr. Brand is the one who is, championing this mission and leading it, he has also, in many respects, given up hope, as we learn, and has hidden it from people. And Dr. Mann obviously goes through an incredible trial, and while he does some monstrous things, you also kind of understand why he has broken in this way. And the great, one of the things that makes the lead characters heroic is, the characters of Murphy, of Murph, and of Coop, and of Amelia Brand, Anne Hathaway's character. They are the ones whose faith, ultimately endures, and it ends up being the guiding light that leads humanity to its salvation.
Yeah. So let's, I want to go ahead and take the time to sort of go through a couple more characters as we kind of, as we explored both Cooper and Murph. I want to talk about both Dr. Brands. And the thing about, and we also go through this with Dr. Mann, who we'll talk about later, is that we see Michael Caine. He's leading the team at NASA, and he says, "This is the plan. This is what we're going to do." And there's actually two plans, and we're going to try both of them. And we trust him because it's Michael Caine. And his role, especially in Christopher Nolan movies, is the trusted advisor who is going to steer us through. And so it kind of blindsides us later in the film when it reveals that actually he's been lying to us, to the characters. The fact that there were two plans. Plan A is for while they're away searching for a habitable planet, he is working on the problem of gravity, so that the people of Earth can actually leave the planet and make it to a sanctuary. And plan B, in case that didn't work out, is for the mission to carry embryos, so that the human species can at least continue on. But as he tells Cooper, when Cooper says, "Well, what about all the people on Earth? You just gonna leave them?" And he says, "That's why Plan A is a lot more fun." And so we never doubt that Plan A is actually on the table, and they're trying for that. But in actuality, it's not. He has actually given up because he doesn't have enough data to actually make it work, and so the plan is just to continue on the species, and everybody on Earth is supposed to stay behind and die. Thankfully, as we get further along in the film, they avert that from happening, but it is just that gut punch about halfway through the film when he makes that deathbed confession to Murph, which just leads to one of Chastain's best moments when she sends that message, to Amelia and says, "Did you know? Did my father know?" And then she addresses, her father and says, "I just need to know, Dad, did you leave me here to die?" And, oh God, it's so good.
Yeah, not just to die, to starve, to suffocate, and it's and obviously it's a tremendous betrayal, all the more so because as you said, it comes from a character that we trusted, who again was not making this betrayal out of evil, but in many respects, this is how evil acts happen, in the sense that he was, as Dr. Mann, trying to justify what Dr. Brand did, says that, like, he was essentially willing to sacrifice his own humanity for the sake of humanity as a species, by trying to get them to essentially believe in something more than their own self-interest and undertake this mission. But obviously the kicker there is that many of these characters would not have undertaken this mission if they thought that they were effectively on a suicide run. Cooper certainly would not have left his family if he did not, if he believed, if he knew that, like, they would not, that there was no hope for the people on Earth. And that is obviously a source of tremendous pain for the character of Murph, because in that moment, she does not know that. She does not know if her father knew that this had happened, or this was the plan B was actually plan A, because Cooper, while as heroic and brave as he is a man who, in many respects, at the beginning of the movie, is lost and frustrated because he never got his chance, to do what he was good at. He trained to be a NASA pilot right around the time that the world decided that, oh, we don't actually need these people anymore. We need farmers. And then he gets this chance, and he seizes it, ultimately, I believe, mostly for the right to try and save his family, but at least in a small part because he wants to, because he wants to go and fly and do what he was meant to do, and that, there are a lot of stories where, like, characters who follow that their selfish instincts, it leads them to ruin. And in this case, one of the brilliances about Cooper as a character and Matthew McConaughey's performance is he manages to play both, like the thrill of excitement that he feels at getting to finally undertake this mission, but also ultimately he never loses sight of why he is doing this. And by the end of the film, when it reaches the climax, that has become his only mission, his only priority. He no longer cares for the adventure or the excitement. He just wants to save his family and save his world. And that's why he ultimately does. But characters had to go through that trial and that suffering to reach the conclusion. In many respects, Murph, she has her faith broken by Dr. Brand and in many respects by her father, but there's that scene in the car where she's talking to Getty, Topher Grace's character, her love interest, and he basically is like, well, what the hell do we do now? And she's like, they gave up on us. I'm not giving up on us. I'm still trying to solve this. And ultimately, she needs her help from her dad to get the data, but she is the one who solves it. That is why they named the space station after her.
Which is great. Nice of you to name it after me. And then they laugh, and it's like, actually, it's named after your daughter.
But she recognizes that, she, as she tells him in that very emotional scene at the end, like, everyone, like, said, like, kind of, I made sure I never forgot how important you were to this. And so it really is the two of them,
Yeah. And then we have Dr. Brand's daughter, Amelia, played by Anne Hathaway, which, I love the dynamic between both between her and Cooper, but also as well between her and Romilly, who played by David Gyasi. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. But which is also a phenomenal performance. And also don't want to forget, of course, Doyle, who is the other NASA member on the team, but unfortunately he doesn't make it very long. But 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 by it's that's one of the things that Christopher Nolan always does really well, though, is like casting even the smaller roles with these great actors. So we see Wes Bentley in that role. So we're like, oh, he's going to be in the movie for a while, and then no. He ends up unfortunately getting killed off on the first planet they visit. So but for the majority of the journey, it's Cooper, Brand, and Romilly, and the three of them have a great dynamic. I love the humor that underlies the relationship between Cooper and Brandt. I love their whole 90% honesty thing. And also, before I before I forget to mention, they are of course not the only people on this journey. We also have Tars and Case, the robots of this trip, which it's science fiction, you need some robots, but they're different robots than we typically get in this in these types of stories. Let me see, I do believe I have some pictures of Tars, which like a big bulky basically like a monolith. Going back to the 2001 similarities. But the monolith was not this funny.
No.
Tars is played by Bill Irwin, who, for any of you who have seen the television show Legion, he's also in that. And this has got to be one of the best vocal performances I've ever seen, because there's the fact that he's a robot, and he only has sort of the emotion that he's programmed with, but it's just he's such a fun character and dependable, as well as Case, and it's just one of my favorite bits of performance from Bill Irwin is when they've locked, they've prevented Dr. Mann from engaging the autopilot, and Case says Tars locked him out, and and Cooper goes, "Nice. What's your trust setting, Tars? Lower than yours, apparently." And so I love them so much. Tars and Case appreciate some of the best characters in the movie, honestly.
Yeah, no, very, very unique, robot type characters, all the more so because of the design and the fact that they don't, unlike a lot of robots in these types of science fiction stories, they don't look human. That's why it's interesting when, when we were introduced to the character in the interrogation scene. I remember the first time I didn't actually realize that he was talking to a robot, because it did. I thought because the character obviously doesn't look like like the robots that we're used to, and then the fact that when Cooper tells him watch yourself, you're not a Marine anymore, and I was like, this thing was a Marine, really? And then I see it in action later in the movie. I'm like, oh yeah, no, this is an incredible.
Oh yeah, when it's I think it's actually Case that is down on the planet, and just the way he moves, and the speed with which he's able to pick things up and then barrel through the water.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh damn. They're awesome, and they're just the banter with the crew is fantastic, and they're obviously very highly intelligent, and I love that when they're, and of course we'll heap praise upon the docking sequence when we get there, one of the greatest scenes in cinema history as far as I'm concerned, and and Cooper says, "Case, if I black out, you take the stick." And it's just stuff like that is so great. And but yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that we didn't forget about them, and we established them as part of the crew. But Amelia, played by Anne Hathaway, just I love that growing respect between her and Cooper as the film unfolds. And to the point where they have this very emotional bond by the end of the film, which then results in Cooper going back out to look for her and join her on Edmund's planet. And it's great because there's that initial kind of distaste and animosity between them. When they first meet, she's like, smart kid, let's have a very intelligent mother. And I also love when Cooper covers Murph's ears and he's like, I want assurances that we're not going to be taken out of here in a body bag. And they all start cracking up, and Professor Brandon is like, Cooper, don't you know who we are? And then she's like, we're NASA.
This Anne Hathaway is outstanding in this movie. That she was also, as you had mentioned earlier, kind of in the midst of a run, of getting to, play some higher profile roles after, starting with like the Princess Diaries and things. But now she had won her Oscar for Les Miserables. She had worked with Christopher Nolan as Selena Kyle, a great Selena Kyle in The Dark Knight Rises.
Best, like for me, the highlight of that film. Like she was I would have loved to see her do more as the character as well.
I love that movie, but I love her in it. And like honestly, I think until Zoe Kravitz came along, I thought that she was she was more than standing up to the legacy of Michelle Pfeiffer as one of the best cinematic Catwomans. But this movie, she plays, a character who, in many respects, we don't get to learn what's really driving her at the heart until almost 2/3 of the way through the movie. But once we do, her entire arc becomes one of the most powerful and potent in the movie, because, she is, she's obviously a very brilliant, capable scientist and crew member. But we see her, struggle throughout the movie with certain, like something she's keeping locked away, and it's the fact that she is in love with this character of Wolf Edmonds, who interestingly is a character who we never meet. He's mentioned several times, but unfortunately he has died. Not that they know that at the time, but by the time that this movie is going on. But
as a matter of fact, when we get to talk about Dr. Mann, I'm gonna have some things to say about the notion of casting in this movie, and the fact that it's very interesting that we're almost kind of set up to think that we're gonna get some big reveal of the character of Edmonds, and he's gonna be a character in the movie, but that never happens because, of course, the character has died off screen.
But even though he has died, that doesn't change the connection that Amelia has for him, as she points out in her best scene, one of the best scenes in the movie, when she's talking with Cooper and Romilly when they're trying to make the decision: do they go to Mann's planet or they go to Edmund's planet? And she senses that she's going to lose the argument on intellectual grounds, because they Cooper and Romilly seem to think that Mann's data he's the one who's still transmitting, even though Edmund's data is more promising, and he's closer. And she gets all that, but she keeps saying Edmund's is the better bet. And she tries to do it intellectually at first, with saying that he has better data. And this is my field, and I know, I can see that this is had more of a chance of survival. But ultimately she breaks down and, confesses that this is a matter of the heart, and she's effectively taking this on faith. And that, is that loses her the argument, but it really kind of wins her like the moral superiority and high ground in our minds, because she becomes incredibly relatable in this scene. You know, when she has the speech about, and this is another area where I think that when people who weren't prepared for what this movie is, you know, big Christopher Nolan, you know, sci-fi epic with a lot of like technical, you know, and scientific, you know, jargon, they were probably not expecting a big speech on the nature of love. You know, and
I will say, like, this was one of the things that I remember was a pushback when the film came out, because I think a lot of people were expecting like a movie, you know, predominantly about cold hard science. And that's not what this film is. And like, I understand why people rub up against that. They, you know, it's a very similar thing happened with the finale of Battlestar Galactica, where, you know, you got a science fiction audience who maybe is expecting and perhaps wants something that's sort of just in the realm of science fiction. Although I would argue in the case of that show, if that's the ending you're expecting, you weren't actually paying attention to the show you were watching. But the thing is, like, for me, and there are movies that do that, and it's perfectly fine. But I think like cinema is an art form, and so it's open to exploring those concepts that go beyond the reality of sort of cold hard facts, and explore emotion and matters of the heart. And so for me, I've always been really open to that, even when it's a, you know, quote unquote science fiction story, because that's what cinema can do. It can go beyond our conceptions of what the quote unquote real world is. And what this speech does is it's great, because it sets up the concepts, you know, of the very end of the film, which then makes it all about the heart and Cooper's connection to his daughter, and the fact that that's the way these beings from the future, as they're revealed to actually be a civilization descended from humanity, or at least that's the theory, and Cooper is their bridge to Murph. And that's through his connection to her, his bond to her, his love for her. And so this is what the movie is setting up there. And that's like, that is cinema. That's exploring the human condition and the feelings that we all have for one another. And so for me, like, it was thrilling to watch all this stuff, and it's thrilling to hear, you know, a character like Amelia talk about her bond to this person that she wants to go towards, and that's what she's feeling. So it's entirely natural and understandable that Cooper and Romilly hear that, and they're like, yes, but scientifically speaking, the smarter decision is to go for Dr. Mann. And that makes complete sense. And I think, given the reality of the situation, they absolutely make the correct call from that standpoint. But we as an audience, we respond to the emotion of what Amelia is talking about. And even if we don't feel like that's necessarily the right decision for the sake of the mission, we also have a lot of empathy for her, and we're emotionally bonded to her in that moment that I think perhaps we aren't earlier in the film. But then as the film unfolds, we're going to see that actually she was right on the money with this. And it's that kind of emotion and the connection to the concept of love that actually is going to serve Cooper well, and actually lead to the ending of the film. So it's one of those things that cinema is uniquely, you know, situated to explore. And if you were doing a documentary, no, that's not the path you would go down. But this is a piece of, you know, of fiction. And so for me, like I get why some people rub up against it, but I'm not one of those people. I absolutely loved this movie's concepts from the moment I saw it, and I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, no, I mean, put a fine point on it. The point of movies and art in general is to make you feel something. If it was just about technical craftsmanship and like expertise and perfect construction and everything, guess what? AI could make movies, but they can't. It can't because this is the missing element. In this type of one of the things I find so brilliant about this speech that that Amelia has is it takes the concept of love and faith and like the very powerful emotional idea that we understand, and it puts it into ties it into the movie's ideas about scientific theory in a rather elegant piece of writing. When she's talking about the fact, they're talking about like love has meaning, and Cooper, who we know feels deep love for his children, for Murph and Tom, and he gives the more analytical definitions, like, yes, love has meaning, social utility, social bonding, child rearing. And then Brand cuts through it, in a kind of portending, given the fact that her own lover has passed away. She's like, we love people who have died. Where's the social utility in that? And Cooper has to acknowledge none. And she takes that moment to give the speech that Quote One is referencing here in the chat, when she says, maybe it means something more, something we can't understand. Maybe it's some evidence, some artifact of a higher dimension that we can't consciously perceive. I'm drawn across the universe to someone I haven't seen in a decade, who I know is probably dead. Love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space. And maybe we should trust that, even if we can't understand it. All right, Cooper, yes, the tiniest possibility of seeing Wolf again excites me. That doesn't mean that I'm wrong. And what it turns out, and Cooper responds, honestly, Amelia, it might. And we get that idea in the moment. But the brilliance of it is that is exactly what happens at the climax of the movie. Love is an artifact of a higher dimension in this film. And wasn't just flowery wordplay. It was directly foreshadowing how they are going to save themselves with the Tesseract and reaching out across space and time, because it is not the fact that these higher dimensional these beings had constructed this incredible 5-dimensional space to bridge the space-time gap and allow humanity to save itself. It only works because of Coop and Murph and the love that they have for each other. If it had been anyone else, it would have just been a big, fancy, 5-dimensional, tomb. But it's not. It is their salvation. And the fact that love is something that is able to be perceived across time and space, like gravity, in a more scientific way. That's one of the things I just find, like, when I was like, okay, this is actually a brilliant piece of artistic construction in the way that the movie set this idea up. It is not just a case of, like, what I think some people who don't want to acknowledge the emotion of it, like the idea of that, like, if we just believe hard enough, love will conquer all. And that is a nice and powerful idea, but like what this movie does is so much more elegant, and it deserves credit for that.
Yeah, which, by the way, as long as we're talking about it, I just like the Tesseract that, which, by the way, this is my Tesseract, not that Marvel thing. Sorry, I couldn't resist. I had to. This is such a brilliant construction. Like, I mean, just the design of it is brilliant. And yeah, I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, holy shit. It's just beautiful filmmaking. But yeah, no, and so let's shift over to Romilly for a second, because I want to give this character his due as well. Played so wonderfly by David Gyasi. They really do a great job of establishing his character, early on in the film when he's talking to Cooper and he's describing, you know, the wormhole and, you know, why it looks the way that it does and how wormholes operate and stuff. And then there's also that great scene between the two of them where he's like having a little mini freak out about, you know, the wall of the, you know, spacecraft. And like, it's just, you know, a couple millimeters, you know, between us and oblivion. And, you know, Cooper kind of calms him down by talking about like, you know, fishermen and, you know, at sea and living on the ship. And so, you know, they really establish him in a great way that makes him an immediately likable character. And then unfortunately, when they go down to the first planet and they get delayed, he ends up stuck on the ship for over 20 years, you know, with just TARS for company, which, you know, and TARS is good company, but he's also not human, you know, which, you know, I'm not being like, you know, anti-robot, but, you know, but it's like, you know, that's a tough existence for a couple of decades. And, you know, he describes that he did, you know, have a couple stretches of sleep. But when he didn't think they were coming back, it seemed wrong to sleep his life away. And it's just so like, you know, emotional and tragic. And, but the fact that he actually does manage to make it through that without completely losing his mind is like a testament to the strength of the character. And I just found it a really beautiful, understated performance.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he is remarkable. David Gyasi is in this role, because it's a kind of, you know, it's not automatically the type of role you would see you were expecting to see in a movie like this. He is not, you know, the rugged, you know, get out there and like save humanity type of astronaut that, you know, perhaps a more conventional movie might have, you know, put in there. He seemed, you know, he is very soft spoken. He is very, you know, methodical and thoughtful. He has a lot of you know, he's perhaps not the most physically suited to the mission, as noted when that great little moment where he is the only one who gets dizzy and sick from the spinning when they're starting, and then and Brand kindly volunteers to fetch in some drama. He gets the great little, "Hey Brand, bring a lot." But he brings strength to the team. You know, he is like, honestly, he's kind of the grounding emotional center, you know, because Coop and Brand have their own like internal conflict that they are dealing with, and we don't get a sense of necessarily of what, you know, what is the driving force that sent Romilly and Doyle on this mission. You know, they perhaps it was just purely the desire to save humanity, but it feels very sincere, you know, on Romilly's part. You know,
and this is the interesting thing. I've thought about this a lot since, actually, all the way back to when I was watching Lost, which, and I don't want to sound like I'm, you know, talking anything negative about that show's format. Quite the opposite. I adore Lost. It's one of my favorite shows of all time, and I'd say that for all 6 seasons, as opposed to some people. I love every bit of that show, but it did bring up this interesting concept of like shows after Lost, and people would say, well, this doesn't have the character development of Lost. And it's like, well, why do you say that? And it's like, well, Lost devoted all this time to like showing, you know, flashbacks and giving us character motivations and all that. And I'm like, Lost was great at what it did with giving them ample room to explore backstories, but backstory is not the same thing as character development. Yeah. You don't have to spell out a character's backstory and like what brought them to a certain point to give the audience character development. And I think like we see that here with the character of Romilly. We may not know what drove him to be doing what he's doing, what brought him to NASA, what made him sign up for this mission, but we get lots of character development from him, and we get a sense of the type of person he is, and his inner strength, his intelligence, and his bonds with his fellow crew members. So the fact that we don't necessarily get his backstory is like, it's ultimately not necessary for the story that's being told here. But he is a very rich character.
Yeah. And I mean, and he is, as a supporting character, he's not the one who needs to like go through the most rigorous conflict of the film. So that means he gets to be a little bit more of the steady hand who kind of and the movie needs that, honestly, especially given that there were relatively few characters in this movie, like all things considered. We have maybe about like a dozen major players, and we spend most of the movie with only like 3 or 4 of them. But Romilly gets to, the time we spend with Romilly makes us feel that, he is someone who is incredibly capable and valuable to this mission. And that's what makes it all the more tragic, that his death is so, sudden and in many respects needless. I'm not talking about needless from the movie's perspective. It's very necessary, but the fact that he dies because of man's kind of cowardice and, desire to, escape, ultimately causing him to set a booby trap that blows Romilly up, like, it's a real loss. And while the movie doesn't really dwell on it too much after, because they're, in danger and they have to, save the mission, we feel it as the audience, like that more so and again, no problems with Wes Besley in the room, but more so than Doyle's loss. Doyle's loss feels more like just a casualty to show how dangerous this world and this mission is.
That's why I very often take issue with when people are like, oh, so and so died, and they never mention it. It's like, well, yeah, but there was a lot of shit going on after so and so died, and there's just not time to dwell on it. Otherwise, the other characters would just be frozen and they wouldn't move when they need to move. But I think a really great moment that takes note of Romilly's importance to the story and the effect of his death really is after Tars gets back on the ship, and he says, Romilly's drawn, I could not save him. That right there carries so much emotion, and so I think that does the job of like, remarking upon his death and paying tribute to the character. And like and again, it's like all the more affecting because it's you got that emotional delivery from Bill Irwin playing a robot, and you get that sense of gravity about it. So. No pun intended. I can't believe I just said that. But real quick, I want to save the stuff with Dr. Mann for after the mid-roll in a second. But I do want to talk also about backtrack a little bit and talk about Cooper's other child.
Yes, that is a funny thing about the movie, that like, and that obviously Murph is such an important Bond, but and like it's the heart of the movie, and it can be easy to forget there's another kid who he also loves.
And oh my God, I recognize that kid. It's the Lisan Al Gaib. That's so fun. Like, it really is, it's so funny to think that, and 10 years is not a long time. It really isn't. And but it's so funny to look back at 10 years past and see, oh yeah, Timothy Chalamet is still an up and coming actor at this point. And and yeah, so what I remember from when I first saw this movie though, it was thinking, damn, that kid's annoying. But now I have some affection for him because but it's the role he's playing. Like he's like he's not the charismatic kid that Murph is. Um, but he's but he's wanting to follow in his father's footsteps and do right by the family, but he just ultimately ends up being a bit bullheaded in that determination as the film goes on, and he's later played by Casey Affleck, who's and it's just like he's carrying so much baggage from everything that he's kind of gone through throughout his life, of not only his father leaving the planet and leaving so much responsibility on his plate, but then also he and his wife lose their child, and the right thing for him to do obviously is to take his family and leave the farm, which is ultimately making them all sick. But then his grandfather is buried out back, his child is buried out back, like he's not going to leave, and that ultimately leads to some conflict and confrontations, which we'll get into when we talk about the film's climax. But like, so it's understandable as a character. But I do remember my thought from back when this film came out was like, no, he's not the likable one.
No,
and one day he's going to leave the planet too, and he's going to do some really bad things on this other desert planet.
Yeah, foreshadowing for Timothy Chalamet rolling around dusty planets, when with possibility. But I mean, we joke about the fact that the movie kind of has a favorite child with Murph being the more of the lead character and Tom kind of taking second fiddle. But Tom is actually a really important. And because in the main, obviously he is Cooper's son, and Cooper loves him just as much as Murph, even though it seems like he and Murph have more like intellectual similarities. But Tom is a smart kid too, and actually one of the that scene I'd mentioned about the showdown with the principal and Mrs. Hanley. The principal, incidentally, played by David Oyelowo in another kind of great little cameo there.
Who's like we recognize him as his image from many things. He was also in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and he's been in a lot of other things. But I think you and I especially know him as Agent Callus from Star Wars.
Yes.
And unfortunately, for reasons, he's never going to quite get to play that role in live action. But like one of my favorite vocal performances from Star Wars animation. He's what an amazing character. So I get excited anytime I see him in something. And like the only thing that I will say, like he gets a thumbs down, like the character gets a thumbs down for me, because it seems like he's quite sensible and level-headed. So the fact that he lets his teacher get away with, spouting that garbage, I'm like, oh no, man, you need to like maybe there's some outside pressure there, but you need to, straighten out your staff and or fire them and bring in some people who are not spouting bullshit. But it might be out of his hands.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little aside. By the way, Miss Hanley played by Colette Wolfe, and she's actually really good in this one scene. She's also in You're the Worst, which I enjoyed. But David Oyelowo, who also was in Selma, obviously that's another thing.
Yes. God, how did I not mention it? Yeah, that's like by far the thing that he's, for good reason, best known as. And God, he was phenomenal in that. Sorry, my mind obviously is always going to go to Star Wars first.
Yeah, no, I mean, mine too. But in particular, like the reason we bring that up is just because this scene is actually is kind of a pivotal moment for Tom's arc in the film when they go to the parent-teacher conference, because Tom is, he's a bright kid, but apparently he's not bright enough. His score is not high enough to justify sending him off to whatever like limited resource university still exists. And so like when the moment when David Oyelowo's principal says like, we've got Tom's scores, he's a bright kid, he's gonna make a great farmer, and that Cooper is kind of like taken aback by that. He's like, you're not even going to give him a chance to try and make something else of his life. And he has the absolutely brilliant cut down line of like asking about his inseam is like, takes 2 numbers to measure your ass, but only 1 to measure my son's future. But I think the reason that it ultimately, does like it becomes an interesting counterpoint to Murph is because Tom is actually okay with being a farmer. He as he said, he likes the life. And while we don't know, like, he seems like it's not like something he resents having to be a farmer. He has other resentments. But he in particular, like he's like it actually is kind of telling that when Coop is getting ready to leave, Donald has the line where he says, Tom will be fine. But you have to make things right with Murph. And that's not to say Tom isn't going to miss his father. He does terribly, but Tom is a little bit more grounded. He is a little bit more, this is his place. This is what he's going to do with his life. But that ends up becoming a source of tremendous, empathy, because he is the one we see first in that message when he's now played by Casey Affleck. And I think this is a great performance from Casey Affleck. I know people have complicated feelings about him sometimes, but he's an outstanding actor. His performance in Manchester by the Sea is one of the best I've ever seen. And this is one of the there are elements of that where he tells the story of Tom's life in just short,
Well, I will say, you want to talk about complicated feelings to be read when browsing internet forums the year that he won his Oscar. Oh boy, that was interesting. But yes, on the grounds of like performances, he does a great job. I think he's probably a bit undervalued in this because. He's not the first actor we get the impression of as relates to the character. He's playing the older version but I think you're right. I think what he does on the video recordings is incredibly impressive. It tells us so much about, and I will say that going back to the scene between Cooper and Tom, when Cooper is leaving, I think that scene sort of says a lot about it. Kind of unfortunately sets up the kind of person that Tom is going to be, and the fact that they don't have a very extended goodbye, and you can sort of, I almost, and maybe it's me projecting a little bit, but I can almost read from Timothée Chalamet's performance that like he wants there to be more of a goodbye, but he's being raised as like he's the man who's going to take over the farm, and so there's this sort of stoicism between the two of them where they're two men saying their goodbyes, and it's like I think he actually wants a more emotional goodbye from his father. But that's not their relationship, unfortunately. And I think that kind of contributes to kind of his sort of emotional state as he ages.
Mm-hmm. And I think that may fall slightly more on Coop than on him, because Coop has just had this tremendously heart-wrenching goodbye with his daughter, Murph. And then I think if he had to go through something similar with his son, he would not have been able to leave. And I think that so that's the fact that they just, he goes and gives him a big hug, but it's a quick hug, and Tom, it seems to be okay with that. And then Tom asks him about, hey, can I use your truck? And he jokes like, you mean your truck? And I think doesn't mean that he isn't going to miss his son terribly, or he's not feeling that pain as much. I think it's just more like he's like, I need this to be easy. It can't be as terrible as it was with Murph. And Tom kind of allows him for that, because Tom's at the age, he's a 15-year-old boy. It's not cool for him to say how much he's gonna, miss his dad. But clearly it's a wound that, ultimately will, fester over time, because he suffers. At first, it's great when he's like showing him the picture of his girlfriend's like, I really think this is the one. And then it cuts to the Casey Affleck version, and he's married and they've got a kid on the way. And he's like, I wanted to name him Coop, but our daughter, but my wife Lois says maybe next time. And then the next time we see it, he's talking about the fact that his first son died. And that's just a gut punch. And then obviously he does end up having a second son, but his second son, Coop, is also, sick. And you can just kind of feel that Tom is a character who he has not given up hope, but it's almost the other kind of giving up hope, not giving up hope that I'm sorry, just that he like his version of trying to get through this is not Murph's version of looking to the stars trying to figure this out. His version of is just to keep his head down in the dirt, basically, and press forward no matter what. And it's designed to be frustrating for Murph, because she's like, your family's dying. If you stay here, you'll die. I don't want you to die. Please come with me. And he's refusing to leave for understandable reasons, but also out of stubbornness, And we all know people like this, people who will, they some incredible danger is coming towards them, and they're like, you need to leave for your own safety, and they're like, no, I'm staying right here. And while that can be admirable in this case, it's also in many type portrayed as him just kind of being like, this was my place, this is where I was told I needed to be, this is where I've lived my life, and I will stay here until the end.
And where that stubbornness then crosses the line into selfishness is the fact that he's keeping his family there as well, and that's something that Murph just can't. It can't let happen.
Yeah, and they have that actually kind of heartbreaking scene where Murph, again trying to get him to leave, basically says something very cruel and hurtful towards him to try and get him to snap out of it, and it causes him to basically say, "Get out, don't come back." And it's to her credit that even though she leaves, she ultimately does not abandon him. She comes back and she sets fire to his field, basically to get him out of the house. But it's enough that when she realizes the message that Coop has left for her, what's the first thing she does? She goes and hugs her brother. And
I do kind of I do crack up a little bit at his reaction in that scene. It's like she's all happy because she's discovered that this is a message from her father, and he's standing there kind of like, yo, did you set fire to my farm?
Yeah, I would hope that he would forgive her for that once she explains that she's now discovered the way to save the human species in addition to his family. But yeah, in the moment he's like, you're telling me you got the secret gravitational data that will allow you to save humanity from a clock, from our ghost dad in the bookcase? What?
But I have to imagine that immediately following that moment, there's actually a really big blow up between the two of them before eventually they come to an understanding. But that wouldn't have quite fit in tonally with the moment.
Yeah. But long and short of it is that Tom is a character who kind of served as a necessary grounding opposite to Murph, and because he essentially, they represent different fates for the human species. are you basically just going to put your nose to the grindstone and try to work your way through this hopeless situation, or are you going to think outside the box? And we get to see those two play out in the form of these two very, different but very fully realized and emotionally impactful siblings.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and do the mid-roll, because when we come back, I want to focus on when they arrive at Dr. Mann's planet, and boy, is there a lot to talk about there. But yeah, so thank you everybody for tuning in. We're not done yet. You know the drill. But yeah, no, it's been really nice to be back and talk. I mentioned last week that it just felt so damn good to be back and talking about the stuff we love. And of course, in last week's case, that ended up being a couple things: a really great TV show, and of course Kira. But it was just fun after taking the holidays off. I just kind of felt myself feeling a bit of withdrawal. So it was nice to get back and chatting with you, Jared, and with everybody in the chat. It just was rejuvenating. So yeah, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight, and yeah, what we have lying ahead, we actually have to go through and talk about what we want to do for the next couple weeks, but next week we are going to be talking about Star Wars Skeleton Crew, which is coming up on its end. I think we have one more episode left this coming week, and I have absolutely loved the show. This past episode was just great, and going in some places that I didn't necessarily expect the show to go. Jude Law, you're a bad man. But yeah, no, it's so I'm really excited to get to talk about that. And then we've got some wide open possibilities for where we go from there. I did want to talk about a couple of things that won't necessarily be in the next the week following that, or even the week after that, but still things that are on the horizon. As we just discussed at the beginning of this stream, we're definitely going to be talking about the film Nosferatu.
Yes.
It's really just a question of when. I think from what I've been hearing, the film is going to come out on 4K and Blu-ray on around about March 9th.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a possibility if you want to wait until then, or we can step it up. But I would say that we probably want to at least wait for the digital release, because as I mentioned to you before, there is going to be an extended cut of this film. And so maybe we want to wait until we can see that extended cut, or talk about it sooner. That's up to you. Where does your mind go?
I'm okay to wait for as excited as I am about the movie and as eager as I am to talk about it with you, Gwen, at length. I do think that in this case, it's probably better to wait until, as you said, at least we have the digital, and preferably, given our taste, the physical media of the movie, so that we can really delve into it, because we've had great conversations, I think, about when we go see movies in theaters and then talk about them. We did that for Dune Part 2. We've done that for Deadpool and Wolverine, for Wicked, for Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. But it is a little bit different when you've only gotten to see the movie once or twice, and are kind of remembering that based off of your experiences of the theatrical viewing. So I think as long as it's not going to be a as long as the Blu-ray isn't going to take more than a couple months to come out, I think we can wait, and then we can really give the movie the justice it deserves.
And then we can also coordinate with Trish, and I don't even know if she's seen them. She must have seen the movie by now. What do you think?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, she didn't post about it in the Slack. I know AR said they were going to go see it, but I don't know if Trish mentioned that she did. But we'll see. Obviously, Trish is a Robert Eggers aficionado like we are, so hopefully she had a chance to see him.
Yeah, it would be great to have her on, provided she enjoys the movie, which I'm sure she will. That would be a shock to me if she came out and she was like, "Nah, it sucked." Because I think you and I are kind of, in agreement there. For me, it's like it's definitely in my like top 3 of the year. I just thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, and you were right. You were right about, and I thought that, but you were right about Lily Rose Depp. Outstanding. Like,
yeah, I think you wrote that she was a revelation, and yeah, that's how I would put it too. Just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and I know, as much love as we have for Anya Taylor-Joy in the hopes that she had been in the movie, would have been in the movie and was originally attached. Having now seen the movie, I agree that Lily Rose Depp was the right actress for this role.
Yeah, which is not to say I definitely want to see Anya come back for future Robert Eggers projects. But I think in this case, these things have a way of working out to where, sometimes fate steps in and yeah. So, and Anya may be busy for the next couple of years on, a certain other big project. So yeah, we'll see when his next film gets announced. But yeah, no, I absolutely adored Nosferatu, and yeah, I just there were scenes in the movie where I'm like, Robert Eggers, there's something wrong with you on a deep level, and I just love it.
Yes. No. He. I've watched interviews with him, and he seems to be a fairly well-adjusted guy. But yes, the dark secrets that come on from his mind and out of his virtual pen, and then onto the movie screen are some gnarly shit.
Well, and it's like, yeah, this movie has one of those, like, it has a final shot that is just like one of those things where you're like, no, like, I know you said he appears normal and well-adjusted, but no normal, well-adjusted person comes up with the final shot of a film like that. I love that about him, but I'm just saying. Good night, Pat. Thank you for tuning in. So we'll talk about that. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up that I really want to do is come March 2nd, which is the Sunday after the 4K gets released. I want to do a discussion about Amadeus. And I believe that the new 4K version will also be available digitally. So if you want to, maybe it'll be available for rental, or even if you want to buy it, it's going to be they finally restored the theatrical version of the film, and there's a trailer out for the 4K version right now, which I have watched about 5 million times already, because the film looked so beautiful. And it's just great because, like, the so-called director's cut, which by the way is not a real director's cut, it was chosen for marketing. Like, it's fine, and and it has been nice to see the film with those other scenes in it, but the fact that for the past like 22 years that is the version of the film that has been made available, and the last time the original version was released was the 1997 DVD. It's just like, it's always really annoyed me, because the original version has its own like tone and rhythm and feel, and the director's cut kind of changes that somewhat. So I was just watching that new trailer, just like jumping for joy, because I'm like, there's my beautiful film that I remember. And so, yeah, I'll, I'll leave this up to you, but I would really love to do a stream about that when it comes out.
Yeah, no, I would be happy to. I know you already had talked about Amadeus on the channel a couple years ago. That before I officially joined as co-host. And I kind of leave it to your discretion as to like which movies you're like, oh, I'd love to talk about this again, or no, I think we covered that. But in this case, I'm actually keen to it because I know Amadeus is one of the most important movies to you, Gwen. I know it's in your top like 2 or 3. And I've actually only ever seen it once. And I saw it on when I was younger. It was I don't even remember which version of it was because basically they showed it to us in music class. and I liked the movies well enough, but I think I was probably a little bit too young to appreciate the fact that it was like one of the most beloved Best Picture winners of the time.
Which to be was the vibe I got from like all of my other classmates when I saw the movie in my music appreciation class. I think everybody else kind of tolerated watching it, and I was sitting there like enraptured. So
I would love to go back and revisit it, and find out which version of the movie I actually watched.
Yeah, well, it's easy to tell because the director's cut has nudity in it, and the original version does not. So, it's the difference between.
They would have shown us that in our music class.
And I have a feeling. Like, do you remember if it was like a VHS copy or if it was?
Yeah. So it was probably the original. But I just don't know for sure.
Yeah. So. And that's also been another kind of point of contention about the movie is that it's because it's so often been a mainstay in music classes, the fact that the version that's been predominantly available for the past 2 decades has been rated R, and has things that you cannot show, to a classroom. Like that's also been like something that has had fans of the movie kind of upset about, because not only is it the proper version of the movie that was preferred by the director, regardless of what title it has on it, it's also made it inappropriate to show in schools, which is ridiculous because, like, for instance, in my case, it made me like completely fall in love with classical music. I was a big fan of film scores before that, but I hadn't really discovered classical music in a big way, and Amadeus is responsible for my love of that. So it's kind of criminal that the version that's widely available is something that can't be shown in schools. So yeah, for that reason, it's good that the film has been restored finally, and also just because it's for me, it's the superior version of the movie, and judging by the trailer, like the remastering that was done for the film, it just looked so beautiful. And yeah, I can't wait. I'm like, and it doesn't come out till the first week of March. So like, I've still got 2 months to wait, but I'm like, come on. So yeah, so that'll be a lot of fun. So we'll talk about that too. And yeah, we started compiling a list of like movies celebrating anniversaries this year. This is by no means like a definitive list of the things that we're tackling, in the immediate future, but I just thought I'd run down some of the things that that we've been thinking, that both of us wrote down a couple things. And like for me, and some of these I have talked about before on the channel, but we absolutely have to revisit some of these. Celebrating its 25th anniversary is Gladiator, X-Men, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which I finally get Nessie to come on the channel to discuss about this, because for as long as I've had a channel, her and I have talked about doing a stream on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou. So we got to make that happen. Then we have Kingdom of Heaven, and of course Pride and Prejudice, which we will be saving for November. Batman Begins, Inception, the the remake of True Grit, directed by the Coen brothers, which for me is my personal preferred version of that story. I think it's fantastic. Mad Max Fury Road, Brooklyn, Carol, The Hateful Eight, Steve Jobs, Ex Machina, Cinderella, which, one of the titles that you added to the list, which we have watched as part of a watch party, but we haven't actually gotten to talk about that. And we are referring to, it's like, I think that's probably like the best live action, quote unquote, remake that Disney has done.
By far.
And Serenity, and also Jaws. We'll talk about that one. Because it's not one of the things. It's not one of the first things that I would go to, but I understand why you would want to talk about it. It's Spielberg, and I'm always open to talk about Spielberg. But it's also like I've seen it a couple times, but it's also not necessarily like one of my personal favorites. But
and to be clear, we just ran down all this was we don't have to talk about all of these, otherwise, because there are other things that are going to crop up. When I was brainstorming anniversaries, and I was like, what's a good 20th anniversary? What's a good 25th? And then I came down the list Jaws, and I'm like, oh, Jaws' 50th anniversary. That seems notable.
I can't believe 50 years, Jared. 50 years.
50 years, yeah. It always sticks in my mind because in 2 years we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary of A New Hope, and that will really make me feel like put my mind for a spin. But
I don't know, like part of me is like, well, that kind of makes sense, but then I'm like, oh, but I remember when it was celebrating its 20th anniversary for the special editions. Oh shit. And see, somehow that the fact that it's the 30th anniversary of the special editions feels worse to me than it being the 50th anniversary of the movie overall. So
oh man.
But and speaking, because we will get to that as well, because we'll be continuing our Star Wars discussions, and next up will be the original Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, and the reason that we haven't slotted those in yet is because those aren't celebrating anniversaries this year. When we do an anniversary screen, we are going to try to time them further around the original release dates. It won't work out for everyone, because sometimes when we might be taking a week off that week, or they might be doubled up, but we're going to try to approximate the actual release dates as best we can for those.
But yeah, those are some of the things on the horizon for this year potentially, and I'm really looking forward to a Kingdom of Heaven discussion.
That's been one of those that I've been actually most keen to discuss ever since we kind of came up with that idea, because and it's interesting because it's not automatically the movie I think about when I think about favorite movie or favorite Ridley Scott movie, because he's obviously had some other great ones like Gladiator and Alien. But I think it was more than when I realized, when you had mentioned, Gwen, how much you love the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, and then I remember seeing the theatrical version and then seeing the director's cut and being like, this is one of the best improvements from a director's cut that I've ever seen on a movie, and that I think alone will make it.
Well, what really cracks me up is that the original version of that movie is such an afterthought now that the Blu-ray, the Ultimate Edition Blu-ray that was released has both versions of the film on there, but it's done via seamless branching on the disc. But the thing is that the director's cut had its own color timing and look. And so if you select to watch the theatrical version, only the scenes that are exclusive to the theatrical version have the original slightly more faded color timing. And so it's they didn't even bother to match up the look of the film overall. They were just oh, who cares? Everybody's here for the director's cut anyway. Which, it kind of No, I don't see myself ever going back to watch that version of the movie, but I do kind of hope, like, if the film's released on 4K, that they actually do like proper new transfers for both versions of the movie, because for the sake of his historical posterity.
Yeah, no, it's been so long since I've seen the theatrical version. I actually am going to watch that one again just to remind myself what it was that it's missing from, even though I know the added scenes, but like they just become so well integrated into the movie. That I'm like, that's the movie. The director's cut is the movie.
I think the only thing from the theatrical that I actually really prefer over the director's cut is that in the director's cut they changed some of Baldwin's dialogue to the on-set recordings versus the ADR that was used in the theatrical version, notably in the first scene between Bailey and Baldwin, and I remember preferring the ADR version because it was a bit like spookier and more ethereal. So, and that was like the one thing, but everything else I'm like, no, director's cut all the way, because it's so superior. But yeah, no, that'll be a lot of fun to talk about, because for me, like, that's a very specific time period in Ridley Scott's filmography where he was still in like gladiator mode. And it feels like it's a true successor to the original Gladiator. And yeah, it's just, and like, I remember when I saw the theatrical version, I was like, it feels like there's something much richer there. And it felt like those characters had so much more dimension to them, like they were sort of characters from a classic epic film that just for some reason we were only scratching the surface of. And so when they finally put out the director's cut, I was like, yes, this is the film that I thought was there. So yeah, I can't wait to talk about that. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. All right, you have anything before we dive back in?
Nope, just we only mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but yeah, next week will be Star Wars Skeleton Crew, and I am obviously very much looking forward to that. Loving Star Wars as much as I do, and loving this show as much as I do, because yes, it has been a revelation as to just how much I've enjoyed it, and I can't wait for the finale. And I hope that for the sake of Jude Law's, future career, maybe he gets a little bit of a redemption arc, but perhaps not. We shall see.
Oh no, yeah. I don't want a full redemption at this point. I just maybe like a little glimmer of something good there.
Yeah. And bring back Kim. That's the other thing I want. Bring back Kim.
Yeah. All right. So let's dive back in. Time to talk about when they decide, instead of going on to Edmund's planet, they go to the renowned Dr. Mann, who is the best of them.
Yeah.
I do want to say, before we get into sort of the reality of, what's going on with this character, I think that this was probably one of the most ingenious things that the movie did with the introduction of Dr. Mann. I mentioned earlier that we're kind of set up to think that maybe we'll actually see Edmonds, and because he's the character who Amelia is in love with, and like, you'd naturally expect that, the big reveal is that, as far as like casting goes, we'll get some name, person who shows up as Dr. Edmonds, and that doesn't happen because of course Edmonds is dead. But what we do get in Dr. Mann was a total surprise to me, because maybe I just wasn't paying close enough attention to the casting. Maybe it was being kept a secret. For whatever reason, when the characters arrive on the planet, and let me go ahead and and they're, unveiling, the character of Dr. Mann and waking him up, and then up pops Matt Damon. I was like, oh shit. And what this does is that it immediately puts us in a place of trust with Dr. Mann, because we like Matt Damon. Matt Damon is Private Ryan. Matt Damon is, the fun character in Ocean's 11. He's Jason Bourne.
Yeah.
It's like we never don't like we never don't like Matt Damon. He's the trusted, reliable character, and so it's like a sense of like breathing a sigh of relief when it's revealed that he's Dr. Mann and he's talking about the planet. And yes, it's stark and it's cold, but undeniably beautiful. And he starts talking about the planet, and we completely accept, everything that he's telling us, because, again, it's Matt Damon. It's, we're going to see him in a different, role of a man, trapped out in space a couple of years later in The Martian. And he's going to be, playing the character that we expect this character to be, very affable, likable, astronaut. And, but he turned out not be that in this, which I think is just a stroke of brilliance, because we're not expecting it.
Yeah, no, I mean, perhaps if Dr. Mann had done a little bit more time trying to science the shit out of out of things like Mark Watney does, he might not have needed to resort to cowardly deception and murder in order to escape. But as you said, that is one of the reasons why this casting choice was so brilliant. And you're right. Like, I mean, whether or not it was known that he was going to be in the movie, I certainly didn't know. I was not like reading the trades back then. And I also, like, it's, even though Matt Damon is a very major star, like, they don't put him in any of the promotional material for this movie to preserve the surprise. And so it's incredibly effective when we open up Dr. Mann's hibernation pod, and there he is. There's Matt Damon, good old Matt Damon. But the character, like, he's more than just Matt Damon in this movie. He's playing a very interesting character who, again, we don't all like get to learn a ton about his backstory either, but we don't really need it. We just know that, like, we have more of the idea of him because, as you pointed out, it's kind of becomes a little bit of a mild running joke that no character can say his name without saying, like, he's incredible, he's the best of us.
Was I just watching? Oh no, I was okay. I remember. Not really a spoiler. I won't give anything away, but I'm in the middle of watching the final season of The Umbrella Academy, and there's the characters have had something implanted in their head to where whenever they refer to their sibling who before the first season died, so that's not a spoiler. There's like they've been sort of programmed with this refrain of he was the best of us, he gave his life, and it's like this thing that they repeat anytime anybody asks what happened to that character. And so it's kind of the same thing here, where it's not in a literal sense, but it is kind of like what you're saying, of every time he's mentioned, it's like, oh, he's the best of us.
Yeah, but and perhaps he once was, perhaps, because I mean, like, they talk about the fact that he was the leader of the Lazarus missions. He was the one who kind of inspired everybody else to follow him on the loneliest and bravest journey humanity had ever undertaken. And his I'm sure his original intentions were good, but the core of the character really comes down to that line that when he finally admits to Coop as they're standing right there on the ridge, it's funny, I never once considered the possibility that my planet wasn't the one. And you're just like, shit, because that is kind of tells you what broke the psychology, even more so than the years of isolation. It was the idea that, like, intellectually, you can be prepared to make this great sacrifice and get and how dangerous it is. You know the risk, you know the stakes of trying to save humanity, and it's and you can understand all that in concept and believe you understand it, what it actually means. But in order to undertake a mission like this, you do have to have a little bit of a delusion, a little bit of an idea that you're going to be the hero, you're going to be the one to save everything. And the moment when Dr. Mann probably got to this planet, and as he said, as soon as I got here, I knew it wasn't the one, having to sit with the magnitude of that choice, that I came all this way and there's nothing here for me, and now I'm going to die here. And I'm not going to be able to save humanity or save myself. Like, that's the moment that broke him. That's the moment that broke the best of us. And it's understandable that.
And I was going to say, it's a very realistic thing to feel, because we're sort of programmed innately to, like, we're the hero of our own stories. So to have this kind of responsibility placed on you, and to be going off on a mission where you're literally your mission is that you're trying to save the world.
Yeah.
There, like, has to be a part of you that is like, this is going to work, and I'm going to be the one, like, I'm going to be the one to find the planet, and especially if you're the leader of said mission.
Yeah.
So that sort of crushing realization of, like, no, not only am I not the hero, but I'm now alone on a cold, desolate planet, and I'm going to die alone. I mean, like, it takes a very strong, like, sense of character to not break from that. So I, like, in that sense, I don't even necessarily, like, with the stakes that high, you have to sort of suck it up and be like, well, this is my fate. But at the same time, it's completely understandable that he's unable to do that.
Yeah, and to his to his credit, in a certain respect, he has another line where he says, I resisted the temptation for years. So even if that initial moment did kind of break him, he didn't, despair immediately. He probably tried to soldier on and, like, see, like, is there any possibility that this could work? Is there any way that I can, try to still be useful or, rescue myself? But eventually he can't. And then that isolation is, his curse, because, like, the other astronaut, like the one on the first planet that they go to, like, Laura Mills, she at least had her planet wasn't the one either, but she basically got there and was killed almost immediately. And that's kind of a different type of, thing. Like, yes, that might be much more of, like, when you're thinking about the sacrifice that you might have to make, you're like, oh, okay, well, I might go to this place and then I might die, but at least if I die, then, like, it'll, then it will be over. But Dr. Mann has to live, and he is not, like, it's because while the planet is stark and dangerous, there's nothing on this planet, it looks like, that's living that can, like, kill him. There's no giant, like, tidal waves. So he has three choices. He can either take his own life, which it seems like, as he said, he doesn't have the strength of will to do. He can accept his fate and try to make the best of it, or he can push the button. And it takes him a long time to do it, but eventually, once he does, he has made his choice. And one of the things where, when he talks about the fact that, like, if I knew that somebody would just push the button, if I push the button, then someone would come and rescue me. And Coop looks at him with just utter, like, horror and contempt and just says, "You fucking coward." And one of Matt Damon's perhaps best moments in this movie of acting is when, after Coop spits that epithet at him, he slowly stands up and he's like, "Yes, yes, 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 and then he attacks Coop, and it's that moment where he's realizing, like, he knows what he did is cowardly, he knows what he did is dishonorable, but he has made his choice, and now because he wants to live, and he will come hell or high water.
And I also, again, like, it's not so much trying to make excuses for the character, but there is also a moment when he's first woken up where they say no, you're the only one, and he says, so far, surely. So it was at least in his head that yes, he's making a cowardly decision by pushing the button and having them come to save him, but he's also kind of anticipating that he won't be the only one. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's an act of cowardice, but he's also thinking he's not necessarily jeopardizing the entire mission, because he doesn't necessarily foresee the situation where he's their last resort. And so, which doesn't make his decision any better, but it also, but it kind of, sets the stage for the fact that he's tries to continue on with the mission by any means necessary once he realizes what's happened. Of course, by that point, he's lost his marbles, so to speak. And but it's a very complicated thing. It's someone who, and it does not help that he was alone for a very long time.
No, and you're right in the sense that, like, we're spending a lot of time talking about how sympathetic and understandable some of Dr. Mann's motivations and psychology is, especially like the moment when he breaks down when he sees Coop after initially being woken from hibernation, and basically like, pray you never know how good it feels to see another face. And we get what he has gone through, but we say all that basically to caveat the fact that his actions are selfish and ultimately and monstrous in many respects. He doesn't just. It would be one thing if he was just like, yes, I'm a coward and I called you to come and save me, and you're here now. Please save me. Please take me with you.
Yeah, because he like the thing that he could have and should have done is, as soon as he's woken up, admit what he's done.
Yeah.
Because like they're not going to kill him or do the thing that he's about to try to do to them. He's going to be in immense trouble if they if they decided to go back home, he would have to face something. But if they don't, if the idea being that they press forward in some way, he might still come out of it okay, honestly, if he confesses what he did. Because if they press forward to Edmund's planet from that point, after he confesses what he did, it's not like they have a jail cell set up, for their one prisoner who did the understandably human thing, cowardly though it was. I think he honestly probably still comes out of it okay, just with people thinking much less of him. But if he had just come forward and admitted it, but he is not thinking clearly at this point, and he still wants to be thought of as the best of them.
Yeah. And I think that is why he makes the decisions that he ultimately does, and attacks Coop and selfishly, cracks his helmet and tries to
which, by the way, is a great moment. Dr. Mann, there's a 50-50 chance you kill yourself, and he says, "Those are the best odds I've had in years."
Yeah, which again is another great line and an understandable thing. But yeah, it's like because I think part of the reason he does what he does is because Coop, having now learned that this is after the revelation that people on Earth weren't supposed to survive, and so if they could have been going on to Edmund's planet, but Coop has specifically said, no, I'm taking after we set up here, I'm taking this shuttle and I'm going home, and that's what Dr. Mann can't allow, because he has lines later as he's like trying to get on the station where he's talking about like we can still complete the mission. Basically, we can talk about completing the mission, and it's clear that like his idea is that like he's gonna take command of this ship, and then he's going to go on to Edmund's planet, and then they'll set up the colony there, and then he still gets to be the hero. Even though that might not be what he's thinking in the moment, I think it's subconsciously what's driving him. And again, I mentioned earlier the fact that like he sets the booby trap that kills Romilly to basically cover his tracks of the data that he falsified. And like that's really the moment where it really becomes kind of unforgivable what he's done, because now he's a murderer in addition to being a coward. It's it means that his fate is ultimately his kind of bleak, and obviously his death is satisfying, but also visually, stunning in the beginning of the docking sequence. But it is notable, for what it's worth, that when you get to the end of the movie and Murphy's at Murphy's at Cooper Station, and they have that memorial there to all of the soldiers or all of the astronauts who went on the Lazarus and Endurance missions, and a testament to their bravery. Mann's name is on there. So in a certain respect, he does get to, kind of be remembered in that way, but clearly those who know. And that means that he was not indeed the best of us.
Yeah. And so as and this is a good time just to talk about the beauty of like all the space sequences and the way they shot all this with the camera rigged to the ships, and just the reality that it gives everything. And it's just, like I said before, some of the stuff is just so heart-achingly beautiful. And we're getting up to, I'm talking about this because we're leading up to the docking sequence, when Mann takes the ship and is going up to the Endurance. And that moment when things go bad, and it's so great. It's set up so well. The tension as like they're chasing him towards, the Endurance, and and Cooper says, what happens if he blows the airlock? And Case says, nothing good. And just, constantly they're trying to reach him through the intercom and stop him because he's locked on to the Endurance imperfectly. And so they know, but he's so single-minded in his focus at this point. He's just not thinking clearly. And I just love the fact that he's in the middle of this big grand speech that he's giving. He's like, I don't know what Eaton told you, but I'm taking command of the Endurance, and we'll complete this mission. Or then we can talk about completing the mission. And he's like, this is not just for my life or Cooper's life. This is for all mankind. There is a moment, and then it cuts out because everything blows up, and you just get the silence from outside the ship, of seeing the explosion, and Cooper and Amelia are just staring at it, and she's like, oh my God, because they're fucked at that point. But then Hans Zimmer's music is quietly creeping in, and Cooper says, TARS, get ready to match the Endurance's spin. And And then it's like, Cooper, it's impossible. And then he goes, no, it's necessary. And then the Hans Zimmer's organ music kicks in, and yeah, and they're racing towards it, and the ship starts spinning, and this is the thing where like there's something that like it is impossible to fathom something like this actually working, but because it's the technical, wizardry that is used to create the sequence, and everything looked so believable, and the performances are so on point.
Mm-hmm.
And the drama is there. Like, you come away from this saying like, I don't believe that could be done, but god damn it, I believe what I just saw. And it's just one of the most stunning sequences that I've ever seen, like out of any genre of movie making. And so much of that is down to we probably have not talked about him nearly enough this stream, but like Hans Zimmer, like he is so instrumental to this movie, as he is with many movies that he's composed for, but this is one of his greatest scores, and which I don't say lightly, because I've always been of the opinion that my favorite stuff of Hans Zimmer has kind of been from a bit earlier in not his earliest stuff necessarily, but like 90s, early 2000s Hans Zimmer is my favorite Hans Zimmer, usually. And so this was coming a bit later on in his career, when he was doing stuff that was stylistically very different, more experimental, and less driven by like what I like to refer to as power anthems, which is the stuff I love of his, like that we get in stuff like Gladiator and The Last Samurai and stuff like that. And so this is from a different era from that stuff, but I think it's absolutely one of his masterpieces of composition. And this sequence above all is like, and it's so funny because I remember I used to post a lot in soundtrack like forum communities, shocker that, and one of the big things that had fans of his upset about the soundtrack was that in the original soundtrack album, this piece of music is not on the album, and it's like, what? And so digitally it was actually released later on. But it's like, this is the piece from the movie, and yeah, it's just the everything combining, the performances, the visuals, the direction, the music, everything combines just to make this just an incredible sequence. And it like, and the line that kind of really kind of that I always go back to thinking about the sequences, because it sort of nails the sort of the tension of the sequences, when he's Cooper's trying to like line up the ship and everything, and Case says, "Cooper, this is no time for caution." It's just, it's so great. I'm just, I could just go on and on, heaping superlatives on this scene, but yeah, it's fantastic.
This is one of the best scenes in Christopher Nolan's entire filmography, which, given how accomplished he is high praise indeed. And it's because it's operating on every single level of what we come to expect for Nolan as a filmmaker and the work of his collaborators. Like, it is a visually stunning, emotionally thrilling, auditorily, magnificent, apotheosis coming together all in the span of just a few moments. And the Hans Zimmer component of that is all the more noticeable, because as much as I adore Star Wars and the fact that there's sound in space, there is something a little bit different about watching a space movie where there is no sound in space, and you see this tremendous, like, terrifying explosion, but you hear nothing. And like that really kind of underscores just how like strange and isolated and lost they are in this moment. And then Hans Zimmer's music comes in, and then Matthew McConaughey, as Coop, springs into action and has the line, and she asks him, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Docking." And he's and you're like,
and the look on her face in that moment is
like what the hell are you gonna do? But as you said, this is where suspension of disbelief, really it kind of earns it, because like, yes, like if the movie was not operating on such a high level, you might be like, well, this is impossible. But one of the brilliances of what Christopher Nolan has done with all of his movies is that he takes something that should be fantastical, and then he does it, as practically as possible, and with enough, expert, production design and cinematography and craftsmanship that you get it 95% of the way there towards believability, and then you're willing to take that last 5% on faith. And this sequence earns that in spades, because the open, like one of the wide shots of like when the Endurance is spinning away and damaged, and you see the ship that they're racing after it, and it's framed up against the desolate, isolated planet. Like that's like
it's especially like and this is why it's really important for the home video releases to keep that IMAX framing, because the shot is still great in the 2.39 to 1, but when that shot opens up and you see, the full scale of it, it's just like, I remember, especially when I saw the film in IMAX, because my mom and I went back to see it, specifically to see it in IMAX. And I just remember my jaw dropping seeing that shot. It's so incredible.
Yeah, no, and this would be a good time to shout out the next craftsman on our list, Hoyt van Hoytema, the cinematographer, because this was the first movie he did with Christopher Nolan. Actually, before this, I believe Nolan had primarily worked with like Wally Pfister, like on the Dark Knight films. Obviously, incredible work there, but like it's notable that every movie he's done since, he's done with Hoyt van Hoytema. Because this, like, I'm pretty sure when you were watching the dailies of something like this, you're like, oh my god. And this, and you mentioned also the IMAX framing of it. Like, it was treated as a big deal. Like when Nolan, I think it was first with The Dark Knight that he was going to start shooting certain scenes in IMAX, and he's done that progressively more with each movie. And this is a movie that where you can tell what the IMAX shots are, and not just because when I was watching it, I happened to notice that when the little black bars would come back or disappear based on which scenes were IMAX and which were not. But it's also just like you look at it and you're like, this is why this was made for the big screen. And it's actually one of the reasons, like, I desperately wanted to go see this again in IMAX. But one of the drawbacks of where I live now, again, beautiful Monterey, California, but the nearest IMAX theater is in San Jose. So I could not make it out to see it in IMAX. But I hopefully one day again, maybe for the 20th anniversary.
Yeah. I will say, and I'll get a little nerdy here, but this was also kind of notable as far as the home video release, because there had been some issues with prior Blu-ray releases of Christopher Nolan's movies because of the way that he finishes his films, photochemically, on film, not with a digital intermediate. And it was especially as relates to the IMAX versions of his movies, it was causing it so that the 35 millimeter footage was showing up as noticeably softer than the IMAX footage. So the way they corrected this on The Dark Knight, I say corrected in quotation marks, was to artificially sharpen the 35 millimeter footage, which created what we home video enthusiasts refer to as edge enhancement, something that we do not like. And I don't think they really kind of cracked how to really master his films for home video until this movie. And so when this came out on Blu-ray, a lot of us home theater enthusiasts watched him. We were like, finally, Christopher Nolan IMAX movie that looked great all the way through. And then as he started to use like in his later movies, even when he wasn't shooting in IMAX, he started to shoot in like 65 millimeter even for the traditional footage. So at that point, everything of his just looked freaking phenomenal, because when you're shooting at that high of resolution, everything looks great. So it became less of an issue as time went on, because he was like, yeah, I'm going to shoot everything at as high a quality as I possibly can.
And again, this is one of the areas where, like, having been as successful and acclaimed as he is, like, this is a luxury that he has that that other filmmakers may not be afforded. But one of the reasons I think no one like holds it against him is he takes full advantage of it, and to deliver these stunning works of art from Interstellar to Oppenheimer, and it's basically a testament again that when you look at a movie like this and you're like, this is a Christopher Nolan movie, and how do we know? Because only Christopher Nolan could make a movie like this.
Yeah. Or at least in this modern era. You know, it's and I think that's part of the reason why his films are so beloved, especially in these modern times. It's because, like, as you've been saying, nobody else gets to make movies like this that, you know, are shot on high quality film, that, you know, that prioritize practical effects, you know, over heavy use of CGI, and it just feels like, you know, it takes full advantage of modern technology, but it just feels like it's both incredibly modern, but also somehow feels like it's from an older age of filmmaking. And that's why we love him. So yeah, after they make it back, you know, onto the Endurance with this, you know, phenomenal sequence, you know, they get to enjoy, you know, their victory. With Cooper says, and now for our next trick, and then unfortunately he's brought down to earth with it's gonna have to be good. We ran into Gargantuan's pull.
Yeah.
Gargantuan, which I don't know if we mentioned yet, but it's what's causing all the time slippage, because it's a giant black hole.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, which you can see in this beautiful shot right here.
Yep.
And yeah, and this is the point where you know, it's already been established that, like, they weren't going to have enough fuel both to try and make it to Edmund's planet and also potentially to go home. So, and at this point, their hand is forced. They don't really have a choice. You know, Cooper learns that they might be able to make it to Edmund's planet, or he says they, but the intention really is to get Amelia there. But because of the limited resources, both he and Tars are going to eject themselves going down into the black hole. Tars is going to pick up, you know, the data from inside the black hole and try and send it out to help the people of Earth. But Cooper keeps it secret that he is also going to have to eject. So we get that really great, you know, emotional moments where Amelia is caught off guard. And, you know, and she says, you said we had enough resources, you know, for both of us. And he says, we agreed 90%.
Yeah.
And yeah.
and she's like says like in kind of very heartbroken mode, like don't do this. But this is a heroic sacrifice that Cooper is making, because they had that moment earlier in the movie when they were making the decision to go to Man or Edmund's planet, and Cooper and ultimately kind of is the one who, as more of the mission leader, got Romilly on his side and outvoted Amelia that they were going to go to Dr. Man's planet. But then there's a scene afterwards where Cooper is trying to let her know, like, this wasn't personal, we weren't trying to hurt. And she's like, you were just being objective. But then she has to get in the little dig, is like, at some point we're going to have to make a decision. We might have to make a decision about going on to the last, hope of Edmund's planet, or you seeing your children again. I trust you'll be as objective then. But then, and so like there was tension there, but like it's notable, like when Cooper is dying on the planet because Man attacked him, he calls out to Amelia, and she does not hesitate for a second to go get him. And then they go through this,
I love that the first thing he says to her before even explaining what's happened is, I'm sorry, because he knows at that point that he made the wrong call.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But it doesn't feel like he's trying to do this to make it up to her. It's more that just he is now recognizing, like, yeah, you were right. Edmund's planet is now our best hope. And I know that you're in love with this man, and maybe there's a chance if he's alive, you can see him again. So it's more important for you to get there. And so if one of us has to sacrifice ourselves to make that happen, it's going to be me. And he does that at this point, not knowing about the Tesseract being, down there. He's doing this knowing that, like, this means that I'm probably going to die and I will never see my children again. And he has now finally gotten to the point.
And I have to say, it is a pretty ballsy decision to be like, I'm going to eject myself down into a black hole.
That is not something you expect to survive. Yeah. And perhaps if this were not, a special black hole, with some help from the 5-dimensional advanced civilization, he may have just been, stretched out into spaghetti and atomized, and that would be it. But that is not this movie.
I will say, another one of my favorite lines that happens before Amelia realizes what Cooper's doing. It's when they're discussing about the fact that Tars is going to eject himself, and she's like, Cooper, we can't ask Tars to do that. He says he's a robot, so you don't have to ask him to do anything. And she goes, Cooper, you asshole. And but then of course, and Tars is like, it's what we planned, and Dr. Brand, this way we can try to get the data to the people of Earth and maybe save them. So yeah, but then of course when they get down to the black hole, he actually can't get the data out, and so it's left to Cooper to do it another way, which is where we get into the Tesseract and this really beautiful sequence where the emotions ratchet up again, and again we talked about the fact that this is the point where maybe for people who want cold hard science fiction, they're maybe they check out at this point, but for me, like, emotionally everything works like gangbusters in this sequence, and I think the design is gorgeous, the emotion is there, just the way Matthew McConaughey is crying out from Murph, as he's banging on the Tesseract and making the books drop down onto the floor. It's this way of bringing everything back around to the beginning of the film, and really and the fact that he's the one like making the plea to himself to stay, not to leave. And it's just, again, he gives such a beautiful performance that just, just makes, your heart just, it is just so beautiful. And also the fact that, and while we're seeing all this, it's also on the other side Murph, grown up Murph, has come back, here distracting her brother with the the farm being set, the crops being set on fire, and because she's pulled back towards this room because she describes it as a gut feeling, and so you've got the juxtaposition of these things going on in many different times, and we also get to see the young Murph, again played by Mackenzie Foy, come back as as Cooper is trying to get through to her and to himself, and like this whole sequence is like, and part of why I love it so much is it is filled with so many almost outlandish, like science fiction fantasy concepts but it's done in such a way that just feels so perfectly at home in the film that we've been watching. And and I love seeing stuff like Cooper asking for the what's the word I'm looking for, the coordinates of NASA in binary, so that then he can leave that trail for himself earlier. So I love stuff like that. Yeah, it's out there, and it's it's more into the fantasy realm than hard science fiction, but like that's the stuff that just really entertains me, because it's taking like science fiction but adding like an emotional layer onto something where the emotion and the connection between the characters is driving the drama.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, I think that we haven't talked a lot about like the movie's science pedigree, that it came from the original idea from the physicist Kip Thorne, and Nolan really like committed to trying to make it as scientifically accurate as possible. And I think by all accounts, he has done a great job with it, because certain people who are have a tendency to pick these things apart have actually said, no, the science is real in this movie, except.
Except, well, it does a similar thing to what the TV show The Expanse does, where it makes sure it gets all the science right, wherever possible. And then because they've so firmly established the science in those areas, then when they go off course and do something that is unknown, or that is more science fantasy than science fiction, because you've established the grounded rules of science fiction that are accurate and true, it then allows the audience to buy into the stuff that is invented, that's not grounded in pure science. In the case of that show, it's it's the what's it called, I guess it's been a while since I watched the show. It's like the alien substance that sort of drives the plot of the proto-molecule. That's what I was thinking of. And in this case, it's this higher fifth dimension, these higher fifth dimension beings who are allowing Cooper to communicate through space and time. But the same principle. You establish the grounded science in the stuff that we know, and then it allows the audience to give over their suspension of disbelief for the other stuff.
Yeah, it's the whole like you get you 95% of the way there, so you're willing to take that 5% leap at the end, and it's a big leap, admittedly, but it's so beautifully executed, not primarily like on a structural and narrative level, because this movie, it does something that I always love. I love it when movies can do this, is that they establish something early in the movie that seems like fairly innocuous, and then they layer the setup through, and then you get to the final sequence, and it all hits home at once. And in this case, it's the bookshelf, it's the emotional connection between Cooper and Murphy. But in particular for me, what really hammered it home was, there's a line that Dr. Brand that has after they had after they've experienced the first time slippage on the first planet, and where, you know, Cooper is devastated that they've lost 23 years, and he's basically like, there's got to be a way, there's got to go back, we can go back, get the time back. And Brand says, you know, she has the line, time is relative, okay, it can stretch and it can squeeze, but it can't run backwards, just can't. The only thing that can move across dimensions like time is gravity. And then when I saw, and obviously another thing that cross dimensions is love, as she also says later in the movie. And when I realized like that was what was happening in this sequence, where he's like, that it's actually he hasn't gone back in time, but he has a connection through this higher dimension, that now we can see this earlier moment and realize that he can have influence and have that connection. And then when he asked Cars to give him the data, and then he starts talking about using gravity to code it into her watch, I'm just like, oh my god. This movie, like, this is where the movie like actually like hits with its like narrative power. Like, this is what we were setting up the whole damn time. It works emotionally and narratively, and that is why it feels like a thrilling and resounding conclusion, even if you don't understand the exact mechanics of how this tesseract works. But yeah, I thought that was a particularly brilliant piece of narrative construction, and it makes the moment when, you know, Murph has the epiphany just feel like hit harder than the endings of most movies I can ever remember.
Yeah. God, yeah, it's just a beautiful sequence, and then like, you know, watching Jessica Chastain's like slow realization, you know, and she's like, it was you the whole time, and you know, it's oh yeah, it's just I keep saying the same thing, but like the emotion of the sequence, it's just so powerful, and I just, you know, I remember seeing the movie for the first time and just like being so sucked in by it, and yeah, I love when, you know, and you kind of talked about this a little bit, but I really do love when movies kind of, you know, pull you back to earlier moments in the story, you know, that you didn't realize were significant, and you know, and then all of a sudden, you're like, oh my god, that's what they were doing the whole time, and we didn't even realize it.
Yeah. And also the idea about the ghost, you know, the ghost in the bookcase in this case, rather than the ghost in the machine. And she is where he had also had that speech when he was leaving, you know, talking about the idea that, you know, parents are like the ghost, can be the ghost for their children, you know, and their future. And he's like, I can't be your ghost right now, Murph. I need to exist. And then getting to the moment at the end where you realize, no, he is her ghost. He has always been her ghost, and he has always existed, and he has never abandoned her. That's where you're just like, oh my god, that's the emotional payoff of the scene.
Great to see you, Cassie. I have a bone to pick with you that you haven't seen the movie, but but thank you for popping in and saying hi. Yeah, go watch the movie.
Yeah.
It's pretty damn good.
Yeah, it is. It is. But I appreciate you coming in, Cassie. You've been probably our most loyal viewer, so thank you.
Yeah, no. Which, you know, to go off on a tangent for a moment, I was thinking about this last night, and I really just want to thank all you guys who tune in, and you know, those of you who chat with us, but also those who you know, even if you don't chat, if you just have it on in the background, and you know, and watch this, like, it means a lot, because we're a very small channel, and and it's really has just turned into an excuse for Jared and me to, to yammer on about the stuff we're watching for like an absurdly long amount of time, and so it does mean a lot, those of you who join us for that. And so I just want you all to know how much that means to me. So.
Yeah, and it means a lot to me too. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's fine.
That's good. You'll be well prepared for next week.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So where did I leave off?
The emotion of the ghost in the bookcase.
Yeah. No, it's. Yeah, and I kind of love that it's left a bit open-ended about exactly, for sure, the entity that kind of set them all on this path. Cooper, theorizes that it's a civilization, that's descended from humanity in the far distant future, which raises a lot of questions about like the concept of like their fifth dimensions, and how they manage all this, like what came first, because they had to survive in order to then go back and, and sort of go back in time and set all this in motion. So that just gets into a whole like mind-numbing thing about how does time work and all that, which are not questions that this movie sets about answering, which is why it kind of leaves it a bit open in that regard. But I don't know. I'd read a story about that future civilization and how they set this in motion. but that's I don't foresee that as something that Christopher Nolan is interested in.
No, this is an element of the movie I'm happy to kind of leave as a mystery. And whether or not this is something that like this was always meant to happen this way, or is them trying the future civilization reaching back and trying to give humanity this chance. I think that's not the point of the movie, and so it's good that they don't get bogged down with it. And our friend 8984M, is I'm glad to hear that you love the movie at this point now, because yes, it is a movie that it's understandable if you don't directly connect with it on the first watch, because it is very dense and there are a lot of ideas in play. But if you give it a chance on a rewatch, it absolutely is rewarding. And stay safe, buddy. 8984M is an LA resident, so
yeah, I really want to send all my best wishes to all of our friends who are out there. I was worried about you too, Jared. How far are you from?
I'm a couple hundred miles. I'm in what's called the Central Coast of California, so I'm actually closer to San Francisco than I am to LA. Obviously, there's still wildfires around here that are be dangerous, but I'm not anywhere close to the line of fire from this current.
Okay. Yeah, and I hope you're okay. 898-4M. Yeah, it's been wild to be watching the stuff. It's also been interesting from another viewpoint, given that I've been thinking lately about making my big move out to LA, and this this might complicate some things for me in the immediate future, but I hope those of you who are out who are out there right now are keeping safe. And it's just been crazy to watch the news coverage of all this. Anyway, so okay, so where did we leave off?
We were just talking about the kind of the emotional power of the ending of the sequence in the bookshelf, and the connection that Murph and Cooper had just made, and then we were just talking about the 8984M's theatrical viewing experience of the movie. So
Yeah, no, I always love it when people do come back around to something and and have a second opinion. I always this happened in closer proximity for me to my initial viewing, but I just remember back when when Kill Bill was out in theaters, uh, which is something that we might put on the schedule for this. I talked about Kill Bill Volume 1 with a couple guests, like it was either before you came on or while you were taking some time off. I don't remember. It might have been right at that changeover point, but we never got to Volume 2, so I might just go ahead and say let's take it from from the beginning and have that discussion. But I remember when Volume 2 of that came out, because the first Kill Bill was really the first Tarantino film I had ever seen. So it kind of set me up for like, that's what a Tarantino movie was. And actually, I think Volume 2 is more like has more in common with some of his other work than Volume 1 does. But when I saw Volume 2 for the first time, I didn't really warm to it. And it wasn't until I saw it on DVD when I watched it again, I was like, which came after I had gone ahead and taken in the rest of his filmography. And then I rewatched it and I was like, oh no, this is actually even better than Volume 1. So for me, it's always very rewarding to go back and take in a second viewing of a film, even if you don't immediately respond to it. That said, as I discussed earlier in the stream, I don't ever want to take in a second viewing of Requiem for a Dream. So
I think we can let that one go.
Yeah. But yeah, it's so I'm glad you enjoy it now. 8984M. It's, obviously we love the movie, and yeah. So, but pressing on. So after Cooper gets the message through, and Murph, realizes what it is, years later, she looks upon the watch and sees what's going on. Then she has that moment with her brother that we talked about earlier, which probably did not go very smoothly in the moment. but
it's a nice hug.
Yeah. But and then we see the Tesseract collapsing, and we're like, oh, what's going to happen to Cooper now? But then he's actually picked up in space, having apparently returned to the galaxy, and he wakes up in a hospital bed, and I think things turned out better for him than he thought they would. And that's where we get that great moment of him thinking they named the station after him, and them joking, no, it's actually named after your daughter. And I love the visual of the space station, and calling back to the baseball game from earlier in the movie, and the kids playing baseball, and and hitting the baseball into the window of the house that's on a completely different axis from the baseball game. So yeah, that's and we're actually seeing humanity at this sort of point where they're sort of adrift, as kind of was described earlier. They haven't quite like settled into a new home. They're in a space station, orbiting Saturn. So the question is, like, what's humanity going to do at that point? Because Cooper even remarks upon it, where he's like, I'm not sure I much care on this whole pretending we're back where we were. I want to know where we're going next. And in fairness, the next planet, Edmund's planet, probably isn't completely set up for human civilization to start there yet. So this is kind of their in-between stage where they're at. yeah, and of course Murph will then tell him to, go find Brant, and they'll start building the new home for, humanity to survive. But the big scene that we get, in this, last stretch of the film is when Murph arrives, woken up from a cryo sleep because just as shortly before she was getting ready to pass away, she made sure that she'd still get to see her dad at some point in the future. So because of course, as she says, she always believed he would come back, and so we get this really beautiful emotional reunion between them, which, like, I'm just gonna say it. Like, I was watching this today, and when Cooper enters the hospital room, and she's there, I just immediately started welling up, and but then the tears came flowing later on when she says, I knew you'd come back, and he said, why, and she says, because my dad promised me. And that was the point where I just lost it. Just sobbing like a baby, and it's just so amazingly well done. I said earlier, it's really a testament to Ellen Burstyn's performance that we're immediately, like, connected in emotionally to her as Murph, despite the short amount of screen time. She does a fantastic job.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a shortened scene, but incredibly sweet, incredibly powerful and moving, and setting up, paying off yet another idea from the that had been set up earlier in the movie, with the idea of time dilation and the theory of relativity, and that Cooper had kind of mentioned to his daughter before he left, time's going to run more slowly. When we get back, we might be the same age. And there was a kind of check-in on that when she calls him on the day that he would have been, she's the same age as he was when he left. And she's like, now would be a really good time for you to come back.
Oh, when she says that, when she says, well, today's my birthday, and it's a special one.
Yeah.
Because today I'm the age, you said I'd be, when you came back, and it cuts back to Matthew McConaughey, and
that's the moment that he just breaks down and cries in the scene that everyone posts as the GIF, of just full on tears, and full on tears for us in the audience too.
Yeah.
But obviously, and in the rules of threes, this is where the payoff truly comes, because he had that moment with young Murph, then he has that moment with adult Murph, and now he has this moment with elderly Murph, who is now older than he is, at least in terms of human aging. Because Coop, as they joke, is like, you look pretty good for 124 years old, Coop. But in this case, it's just it's beautiful, because obviously, even though it's been years since he's seen her, and she's now an elderly woman on her deathbed, but the moment he walks in, and she gets that, she immediately starts crying, and because she knows, he looks the same, it's her dad, but he knows it's her. He doesn't have to ask. He knows, he knows that this is his Murph, his daughter, and she. And the fact that they have this incredibly, beautiful, sweet connection, while she's surrounded by her family. Apparently she and Topher Grace got busy after the Eureka moment, because they have a lot of kids and grandkids, and hopefully some of those are also kids too.
I don't want to sound like I'm harping on getting on either Topher Grace's case or even Nolan's case for casting him, but I don't know if it's just because he's so identifiable with one certain character, but almost every time I've ever seen Topher Grace in a movie, it usually ends up being a moment where I'm like, oh hey, it's Topher Grace.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And apparently, no matter what universe he's in, he always has a thing for beautiful redheads. Because,
Yeah.
um,
And that is a little harsh because actually I always really enjoy his presence. You
yeah,
know, whenever he shows up in movies, but like he's always going to be Foreman. So
yeah. I mean that's just the curse.
yeah.
He's doing well for himself. Certainly better than a couple people from that show.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Within one, other people are doing it. But yeah, so but in particular, this scene is just, she's surrounded by her kids, and that is actually a very important moment because, obviously Cooper has traversed this incredible journey to make it back to her, and now he's done it. But it is telling that she tells him, before she dies, at the actual moment of their death, she tells him, to go, and not in like a get out way, but just a like the beautiful and heartbreaking line calling back to King Theoden's line from Two Towers, like no parent should have to watch their child die. And in this case, she's like, I have my kids here, I have my family here. You did the important thing. You got back to me. Now go. You want to know where we're going? You set that course. Go save Dr. Brandt. And then he walks away, and we see her, her reaching out to her kids, and we know that she will probably not live much longer after this, but she's at peace, and Cooper's at peace too, because even though he will not be there at the actual moment of her death, he kept his promise to her.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's that's actually technically the end of the movie, but I do want to step back a couple minutes earlier in the movie and just make sure that we don't forget the reunion of Cooper and Tars.
Yeah.
Where he boots him back up and makes some alterations to his humor setting.
Such a great joke. Like, I mean, every single one of Tars is, humor setting actually like is pretty well calibrated because all of his jokes are funny. But like, the plenty of slaves from my robot colony, and you can use the QA to find your way back after I blow you out the airlock. But then this is just like a nice little payoff to that. Humor 75% confirmed. Self-destruct sequence in T minus 10, 9. Let's make that 60%. 60% confirmed. Knock knock. You want 55?
Oh god, yeah. And yeah, no, and like it is important really to keep bringing up Bill Irwin, as Tars especially, but the same, extended out to the actor who voices Ed Case, who actually I just looked it up, and both of them are Bill Irwin. I actually did not know that. They sounded distinct, so this is the first time that I'm actually learning about this. Or actually, no, I take that back. Case was puppeteered by Bill Irwin, but it looks like the voice was Josh Stewart. Okay. That makes more sense to me. I was like, it did not sound like the same person. Yeah. But especially Bill Irwin as Tars, like this is a movie where you need some humor to like lighten up the mood a bit because there's so much drama in it, and he does such a great job. And I do want to like again stress for anybody who hasn't seen the FX series Legion, which is about the X-Men character. It's so good, and Bill Irwin plays the character in that show, and he's fantastic. And I highly recommend that show to any and all X-Men fans, especially. And if you're just a fan of great drama, because it's a really good like high concept science fiction show on its own. Definitely goes to some areas that you don't get to see very often in Marvel adaptations. But yeah, so yeah, and we get just to finish things off, we get Murph's voiceover talking about having Cooper go to find Brand, and we see images of of Amelia on Edmund's planet, and we see confirmation that Edmunds did in fact die, and yeah, she's there on her own, setting up the planet for the future of humanity, and he's setting off to find her so that they can do it together, which is again like communicating the importance of that emotional bond between humans, and how important that is. And yeah, it's a beautiful ending with hope on the horizon.
Christopher Nolan, all of his movies have that kind of powerful ending, and this is probably one of the most understated. But it always gets me when Brand is giving that voiceover. We're talking about Brand alone in a strange galaxy. Maybe right now she's settling in for the long nap by the light of our new sun in our new home. And that kind of really pays off the idea of what I had talked about with the idea from the monologue from the teaser trailer, the whole thing about making the unknown known, and our destiny lying above us, and they are doing it. Now they have done it. They have saved the human race by being explorers, by being pioneers, by being brave, but by being human, and we saw, and because this is ultimately, a movie about, humanity in the best of humanity, and in some aspects, the worst of humanity, that we touch on the edges. Like, one thing we didn't mention about the man scene where that I want to just circle back to briefly was Brandon Cooper have a conversation before they as they're departing, before they leave, as they're departing Earth, where they talk about nature, and Cooper asks her, like, do you think nature can be evil? Like, it's not evil, is like, and Brand is like, no, fearsome, formidable. It's is a lion evil because it mauls the gazelle, and Cooper has the line, just so it's just what we bring with us then, kind of the whole idea from the Dark Side cave, like, it's what's in there, only what you take with you. And that really struck me in the scene where when man having made his cowardly decision is attacking Cooper, and they cut to this wide shot on the desolate frozen planet of these two men attacking each other and trying to kill her, and it really hit me, like, they're millions of light years away, they're in a completely different galaxy, they've left Earth far behind, and here is the worst of humanity still here, but by the end we see their best. We see the best of the humanity, and Brand, having now made that sacrifice, even though it cost her, it cost her the love of her life in Edmonds. She has set up the colony that will ultimately be the salvation for all of the people who were on the space station who made it off of Earth. And Cooper's gonna, having proven that he is perhaps one of the best of humanity, with the sacrifice that he has made and the bravery he has shown, he's gonna go do it with her. And their future, together, we don't get to see it. But this is one of those times where, like, even though you don't know, like, the end and what awaits, like, this is a journey that Cooper will make it there, humanity will make it there, and that everything will be okay, and there will still be trials, because that's the human experience, but this was their greatest trial and they passed.
Yeah. As a final footnote, I just want to say that the Cooper Station administrator who guides Cooper around is played by I'm gonna get his name wrong, Elias and Gabo. Sorry, I don't know how to get that right. People know him as Ricaro from Game of Thrones and the first couple seasons. That was a fun thing, especially back in 2014. I was like, I know him.
I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I will where I'll watch a show where a Game of Thrones actor from, even if they were in a minor role, like pops up in a movie, and I'll be like, Game of Thrones actor.
Yeah, we're all the Leo DiCaprio meme.
Yeah. And I always loved Elias Gable as Ricaro, even though his fate was cut tragically short in Game of Thrones, as many characters are. It was nice to see him pop up here, even if it's obviously like a very small role.
Yeah. Speaking of really small roles, like, was I alone in just being shocked when in Gladiator 2, when there's a blink and you miss it, appearance of Sandor Clegane himself.
Yeah, no, I knew you were going to bring that up. When I saw that too, I did the exact same thing, and I'm like, oh, is he going to be a bigger part of the movie? No, he's not.
No.
Okay. But fortunately, he'll have other work soon, and he will have a much bigger, more important role. He will be taking over as Balin Skull on Ahsoka, and I am hard pressed to think of a better casting that they could have done.
Yeah, it's really tough to still kind of deal with the loss of Ray Stevenson, both for that role, which I think he was just absolutely phenomenal in, but just as an actor, I have loved him dearly ever since I first saw him in Rome as Titus Pullo. It absolutely breaks my heart that we've lost him, but I can't think of that many people who I'd rather see carry on that role. I think the one other person was who you actually mentioned as someone you were thinking of, as a potential replacement, which was Graham McTavish, because he definitely has that kind of air about him that feels, like that character. And, but I have absolutely no problem with the direction they went in.
No, I had tweeted out or Blue Sky out, I should say, that I not necessarily considered him for the role, but the moment I heard it, it was like, oh, that's perfect, because he can play both the dangerous, intimidating side of the character and the more thoughtful, like philosophical, soft-spoken side. And that's more important, as 894M points out in the chat, than just getting an actor who looks the part. They have, for a character like that who is so indelible to the Ahsoka series, they really needed someone who can carry the weight, the emotional weight, and Rory McCann can do that in spades, as anyone who has seen him in Game of Thrones can attest.
Yeah, and it's just like, as evidenced by what we just said about is blink and you miss him cameo in Gladiator 2. It's like, oh, Rory McCann deserves better than that at this point. After, because I first noticed him in the film Alexander, which he was, yes, the movie has a lot of issues, but he was actually one of the real bright points of that movie. He plays the character, I think his name was Craterus, and he has some real standout scenes in that movie. And so when he was cast as the Hound in Game of Thrones, I was like, hell yes. I actually didn't know about him being in Hot Fuzz, which a lot of people knew him from. When I saw that a couple of years later, I was like, oh wow, that's a really different role. But so yeah, it was a little disheartening to see him get relegated to like a cameo role in Gladiator 2. So when that news came out a few days ago, that he was going to be taking over the role of Balin Skull, I was like, yes, that's amazing. And plus, I think it's going to allow him to show some different aspects of himself, apart from playing the Hound, which is what he's predominantly known for nowadays. Maybe not stretching himself as far as he did for Hot Fuzz. but it will but he will get to do some things that are perhaps a bit more soft spoken in areas than what the Hound was.
Yep, and he'll have more than one line of dialogue.
I'm holding out for at least one yarp. Maybe that won't fit. But yeah, anyway, so getting off target there. But yeah, so this is just, for me, one of my favorite Christopher Nolan films. It's still I'm actually trying to think about what my favorite film of Christopher Nolan's is at this point. I know we hate ranking stuff because it's ultimately it's futile, but I feel like it's kind of easy now to point at Oppenheimer and say, yes, that's the greatest one. And I won't argue with anybody who says that. I think I tend to still go towards The Prestige as my favorite Christopher Nolan film. But regardless, this is up there as just one of my absolute favorite of his films.
And I would probably still ride for The Dark Knight and Oppenheimer, as you mentioned. Interstellar is a movie that, like, actually when I had I compiled my unofficial Christopher Nolan ranking, I hadn't seen Interstellar in a while, and so I had it ranked like a few slots lower than I probably should. And then when I rewatched, I'm like, going up, going up. And again, like, it's hard with Nolan's filmography because he's made 12 movies, and as far as I'm concerned, all 12 of them are bangers. And so, he even his first film, Following, which is like more of a preliminary effort, like, you can see the scenes of like the seeds of what will become the filmmaker in that movie.
I'm shamed as a Christopher Nolan fan because I still have never seen Following. So
yeah, you should at some point. It's only 70 minutes, and I think it's available for free on YouTube. It is definitely number 12 in his filmography of the 12 films for me. But, like, again, you watch it and you're like, oh, like, I can see this was like clearly somebody who had a mastery of the craft even from the outset, and you can see a lot of the film, those traits that will come back in later movies. And there's a character named Cobb, which comes back later in Inception. So,
the other movie that I actually have not seen in a really long time, and I feel like I would evaluate it much differently than when I last saw, which was probably in theaters, is Insomnia, which I think I judged it harshly when I originally saw it because it wasn't Memento.
Yeah.
And and now that I have a much wider understanding of Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker, it would be interesting to go back and see that again, especially if nothing else, just to watch Robin Williams' performance, which, even if I had mixed feelings about the movie overall at the time, I was in awe of everything that Robin Williams did in that film.
Yeah, no, I mean, Insomnia is also like lower on my Christopher Nolan rankings, which I personally tend to chop up of it is the lone film in his filmography on which he is not the credited screenwriter. He's just the director. But if that's what you're dealing with as like the bottom of the rankings, you're a pretty special director, because that's a really good movie. And this is like, and Interstellar is, obviously, like, again, it came out in 2014. This was before Nolan's Oscar glory. He had not even been nominated for Best Director at this point. But this was the part of the area, like, after the Dark Knight snub, before his first nomination with Dunkirk, and then his win for Oppenheimer, where you were just like, come on, Academy, come on.
Yeah, well, and it was especially frustrating because, as we mentioned before, this had kind of like a more mixed critical reaction than some of his other work. And, we talked about the reasons perhaps for that and all that. But I just remember, like, after actually seeing the movie and being like, what are you all smoking? This is brilliant. And then all the nominations came out, and I'm like, God damn it, what the hell? What? Like, yeah, it's something that's become more and more apparent to me that sometimes I just, and it's not just the Academy, it's sort of like the overall sort of cultural zeitgeist where I will find myself so at odds with what the general vibe going around about, certain movies, is that I'm like, sometimes I'm like, y'all are smoking something. Because but I've been very happy to see that amongst, like, film fans, over the years, that this has actually been consistently, like, one of the most revered of his filmography, which, has been nice to see, because that was my reaction when I first saw the film, and it just felt a little weird to me that the sort of the reaction from the industry just was not in line with that, which I kind of feel like in the I kind of feel like there was pushback against Nolan around this time, where they were kind of like, we need to take this guy down a peg. But unfortunately, that didn't work out for them, because he just kept getting better and better and better.
Come at the king, you best not miss. And I think 894M puts it perfectly in the chat. You live in LA, you realize some folks, including in the Academy, don't know shit.
Yeah.
Which I think is fair, and definitely if you're on X or other social media like film Twitter kind of stuff, there are a lot of people there who claim to be very knowledgeable about film and actually don't know shit or want to put on airs, and I think that is kind of what happened a lot with this movie. Just the fact that, like, it was probably too early for the Academy to coronate Nolan. This movie did get 5 nominations, we should say, for Best Original Score, Best Production Design, Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing, and 1 Best Visual Effects, which, duh. But in particular, I think the mixed critical reaction and initially came down to the fact that, as we said, it was not the type of movie that people were anticipating. They kind of felt Nolan was, like, reaching out for something that wasn't his strength, making an emotional movie, and it was kind of a stay in your lane idea. And people tend to get very, especially people who present themselves as, film Twitter personalities, have a tendency to want to, wow people with their knowledge of film craft and not simply say, this movie moved me emotionally, because then you're like, well, then you're simplistic, then you're a rube, you don't actually understand the craft of cinema. And it's like, no, this is a movie that is ultimately designed to make you feel things for all its technical brilliance. And I think one of the reasons that it has kind of undergone a more of a I won't even say a reevaluation, but just like, as now 10 years have passed, more and more people are just like, no, this movie is brilliant, and I love this movie. It's because over time, you can get that initial hit and high from saying in the moment, like, oh, the camera angles that Nolan used in this sequence were not the accurate ones that I would have used, and I think that makes us distant from the characters. And that's a bunch of, or you can just say that, like, this movie moved me or this movie didn't. And clearly, this movie has affected a lot of people, because it is consistently cited as one of the most beloved films in his filmography for a reason.
Well, and that's kind of always been the thing for me, is that hold on a second. False alarm. And that's kind of always been the thing for me, and I don't want, like, this is gonna sound like me tooting my own horn. I'm not doing that, but, like, I've always been so much more interested in how movies and TV shows make me feel, other than, and it's so funny because I'm like so in tune with the technical craft of filmmaking as well, and it's very important to me. And I will probably see and appreciate things that a lot of people I know, because they've told me as much, just like don't really pay attention to. And but yet, for me, the number one thing is still always about, how did this make me feel? You know, am I emotionally connected to the story and the characters? And that is still paramount for me. Um, which is why maybe sometimes I feel like, I'm at odds with sort of, the sort of end of the year buzz about things. Like, no, I'm gonna, like, when I tell you what my favorite movies of the year were, it's gonna be what were the 10 movies that made me feel something. Not, oh, this was the most technically astute film, or, mm, which is funny, because I will still go on and on about this stuff, about the films that I loved. I will go on about the camera angle here is fantastic, and wasn't this score is it fantastic, the way it was doing this, and calling your attention to this, and so I will single out all those things, but they're not necessarily the driving force behind what makes me like love a movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's still always the emotion. And that's why, like, I made a big mistake when I applied to film school back, like, probably, when was this, back in like 2010, I want to say. It was the year of movies like Inception and Black Swan, and all that. And when they asked me what my favorite movie of the year was, I said True Grit. That was clearly not the answer they wanted to hear. I should have said something that was more like technically complicated. Which sounds like an insult to True Grit. There's a lot of technically brilliant stuff going on in that film, but it's not the film that stands out as like pulling off all kinds of technical wizardry and stuff. And I learned from that experience that, like, no, you don't actually say the things that are on your mind. You should tell them what they want to hear. Unfortunately. And yeah, that's probably why that didn't work out for me. That, and I'm a very shy, reserved person, and and that probably didn't help either. But yeah, I'm going off on a tangent now. But so yeah, it's and that's why, like, regardless of what the initial conversations surrounding a movie like this have been, like, I was emotionally pulled in, and it had all that brilliant technical craftsmanship that Nolan is known for. So it's really, this movie I see as the best of both worlds.
Yeah. And and that's that honesty about, like, the fact that you have all this knowledge about technical craft, and can apply it and talk about it at length, but ultimately what's most important is talking about why this movie connected with you emotionally, and why it made you feel things. This is one of the reasons I love talking about movies with you, Gwen, and because I've made it clear, like, I have a lot of issues with the film Twitter and the kind of person who tends to reside on there. Somebody who seems to be more interested in presenting themselves as someone who, look at me, look how knowledgeable I am, and watch me tear down this movie to prove my bona fides, than actually just appreciating the art for what it is, even if it doesn't entirely work for them. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, we connected and why we are still doing this a couple of years later. But it's, for this movie, like, this is one of the ultimate examples of, like, it is a technically brilliant and thematically rich, and all the craftsmanship is there, but ultimately it just has something at the heart of it that makes it the special movie that it is. Because 8984M brings up in the chat 2001, which I think is what a lot of people were comparing this movie to when it came out. And this is not that movie. They're both brilliant movies in their own way, but this movie is doing something different. And for me personally, this is the type of storytelling I respond to. Something that always puts the character at the heart of its characters at first, and makes and focuses on, you know, the emotional through lines and the why of the characters, rather than just trying to basically post by on its wizardry. And I think that is one of the reasons why it has endured for me.
Yeah, and I actually in 984M, I did mention 2001 when we started the stream, but only as a way of sort of, because, you know, there are some things that, you know, you can draw a connection to, but also I was pointing out the differences as well, and why I'm probably more inclined to go for a rewatch of this movie than 2001, because it's so much more emotionally in my wheelhouse. Which is not to say I have not watched and enjoyed 2001 on many an occasion. Especially, I would have to say, like, it is one of those movies that if you ever get a chance to watch on a really, really big screen, absolutely do it, because I got the chance to see 2001 in IMAX, and just I don't have words for it. It was just one of the most astounding experiences I've ever had. It allowed me to really sort of transport back to the time it was made, and realize that, you know, especially for the world of that time where we had not actually even been to the moon yet, you know, it's like a trip into outer space. And to see that all the way back in, what was it, 1968?
Yep.
I want to say, just must have been one hell of an experience for audiences. And when I was able to watch it through that lens on a big, gigantic screen, it was unlike any other time I had seen the film before. And yeah, so it's. So that is a brilliant film for its own reasons, and this is a very different film. And like I said, it's more in common with the stuff that tends to appeal to me, which is an emotionally engaging story that's, you know, that's placing character first and foremost. And it's one of the actually brilliant things about 2001, that the most human character in the entire movie is actually Hal. Which says something about, you know, the humanity of the future in 2001. But yeah, so I guess that about wraps up the discussion. Anything else you wanted to comment on before we wrap it up?
No, just the idea that, you know, this being the 10th anniversary stream, and as a famous character once said, and at the ending of a beloved show that we love, ask me again in 10 years. Ask me again in 10 years on Interstellar. The answer is, this is still a masterpiece. And I love it.
And I will say, because I can't help myself in regards to that other show, it's, you know, what I was just commenting on, like, about me responding to the emotion of stuff rather than just the technical wizardry. It is a point of contention for me that I hate it when some of our friends say, you know, they explain away my love of season 8 of that show by saying, well, you're much more into the technical craftsmanship, so you appreciate all the stuff that went in there. And I'm like, no, there's that, but it works for me on a story and character level, and that is the thing that interests me about how that show wraps up. And I'm like, don't try and explain away this thing that you refuse to acknowledge by saying that I don't actually care about character and story. I'm only interested in craft. Like, no, you don't get to do that as a way of, you know, making my different opinion make sense to you.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's all I'll say about that, because it does have to do with what we were talking about. So
No, we love our friends, but this is an area we've made our position clear that we we have staked our claim and we have our reasons for it, and they are deeply held. So
yeah,
just accept it.
who knows? That might come up this year as a
Oh
discussion on the
yeah,
channel.
no. At a certain point, it is an inevitability that will happen. It's just a question of, are we gonna just do that, or are we gonna actually go season by season for the show?
It would actually be a really interesting experiment, because I'd love to see if all of a sudden all of our friends show up in the chat just to give a shit about it. And it's like, so you don't necessarily show up week to week, but when you have the opportunity to be negative and to rag on us about something you disagree about, then you show up. It would be interesting to see if that is in fact what happened. It would be an interesting social experiment.
It would, but I welcome the challenge, because I've honed my arguments in defense of season 8 over many a Twitter battle, so I'm ready. I got my ammo.
Yeah. And you and I might have something akin to that when we have to do the original trilogy first, but we are going to work our way down to the sequel trilogy for Star Wars, and we will eventually get to our Rise of Skywalker discussion. But more and more, I do feel like I want that to be a discussion on, there's stuff that doesn't work for me, but I think it would be much more interesting to have a conversation about the sort of the themes of the film and the intentions of things, even when, for the stuff that I personally don't think works as well, but I still recognize what the filmmakers were going for. And so it would be very interesting to still talk about the ideas of the film in a way that's, wouldn't just boil down to, I don't like the way this was done.
No, I have every confidence when we finally get there that it's going to be a very productive and thoughtful conversation, and a friendly one, but perhaps playfully, because I love both the themes and the execution of that movie.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But if nothing else, I'm always going to have like the moment. Now we're just carrying on the conversation past our main topic, but we'll be wrapping up in a minute here. But I will say, for Rise of Skywalker, even with the things that I do take issue with, there's always going to be, for me, the climax of that film when when the the Jedi of the past reach out to Rey. And particularly, I'm thinking of that moment where you get Qui-Gon's voice saying, "We stand behind you, Rey." Like, oh my God, like that just gets me so much. So it would be dishonest. It would be dishonest to say like there aren't things in that movie that work for me, both from an idea standpoint and execution. And we will get to talk about those in detail. I'm just saying that it's not as, my list of things that check both those boxes aren't as extensive for me as they are for you.
Well, that's fine, because the moment you just mentioned, the Rey connecting with the Jedi of the past, that is my favorite moment in the entire Star Wars saga. So we will be able to celebrate that together for sure.
Sorry, this is just trying.
Yeah, well, anyone who's been in the Force Center Discord knows that I will gush about Rise of Skywalker at the drop of a hat. So join us there if you wanna see me in my element.
I want to check back into the Force Center Discord. I've been off for a few days, just because I've been kind of taking time away from like the internet in general. just because I've been focusing back on my reading and like trying not to have my head buried in my phone constantly. So, but maybe I'll turn on my computer, after the stream and checking with everybody there because it is like I feel like the Force Center Discord is like where it's my place where there's still like a really bustling community, of people. Here Be Dragons used to be like that, but it gets pretty quiet, in the Slack and and Blue Sky is nice, but I have to traverse through a lot of stuff that I don't want to read just to get to the stuff that I do. So yeah, I feel like Force Center has really become a nice haven for me of late.
Yep, and 894M is also there in the chat as well.
Yeah.
So it's but yes, less internet is always a good thing. So we will endeavor to wrap this up so you can all enjoy less internet and enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening.
I will say it's funny once you cross like about 2 days of like detaching yourself from the internet, your head begins to clear and you're like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to feel like.
Yeah. It's almost like a natural high.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great, but no, I mean seriously, like everyone should take time away from the internet. But then once you've taken that break, you can always come back because
we say as we're talking to the people on the internet.
Well, but the thing is, like for our take some time off for the middle of the week, but then that Star Wars aside was not entirely random because we are going to be talking about Star Wars next week. We're going to be talking about Skeleton Crew, and it'll be a great conversation. Hopefully, after we've seen the finale and everything, everyone gets to live happily ever after with the pirate, the pirate booty, and John Norwood has gotten his Jack Sparrow moment sailing off into the or his
I'm now really honestly starting to wonder if John Norwood was ever an actual name of his, or if he literally came up with that on the spot when he was introducing himself to the kids.
I'm starting to suspect the latter.
Because like that would make sense of the name and how weird it sounds. It's like it is something that you would literally just make up on the spot.
Yeah. That's another thing I want from the finales. I want at least one more name for Silvo / Jod / Crimson Jack / Dash Zenton / Professor Umium Gorlox.
I don't care what his name is though. I have like really enjoyed his performance, and as despicable as he got last week. So yeah, looking forward to that. And then tonight after we sign off, I'm also going to be checking out the season finale of what's the DC show, Creature Commandos.
I haven't started that yet. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's really good. I know I kind of talked derisively about it initially, where I was like, it feels kind of very derivative of Suicide Squad, but it has a different element of it in that it really sort of delves into the histories of each of the characters, which I feel separates it from James Gunn's Suicide Squad movie. And so and plus the animation aspect of it just allows them to do some different things. I've had a lot of fun with it. So yeah, I recommend it. And the only thing about otherwise in TV show land for this week that I'm upset about is that they're making me wait 2 weeks for the season finale of Outlander. So there was no new episode this week, but you know what? That's okay, because that means that the season lasts for a week longer. So yeah. Okay, we have rambled on enough, and I've dragged this on past the point of the end of our discussion. Really, I just wanted to get us closer to the 4-hour mark.
Yeah.
But thank you all for tuning in tonight. This was a wonderful discussion of a movie that I love very dearly. As we mentioned, next week we're going to be talking about Star Wars Skeleton Crew. Later on down the line, in March, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be doing a revisited stream of the film Amadeus, which will once more be available in its original theatrical version. And then probably the week after that, we'll be tackling Nosferatu, the new film by Robert Eggers, which is absolutely brilliant. And then we'll be tackling a lot of anniversaries throughout this year, which we will narrow things down. And as a matter of fact, as soon as we sign off, Jared and I will probably talk about what we're going to do the week after next, just so that we have a game plan. So yeah, so lots of fun stuff to look forward to. Thank you all again for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful evening. And yeah, we'll see you next week for Skeleton Crew. Until then, I don't know what we want to do for a sign off this week.
There's only one way to end this stream from this movie, and it's to say, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." But we're going to turn it off now, so sometimes it's okay.
All right, bye everyone.